Well, I have 8:07 and I would like to keep us on time today. We did a pretty decent job of that yesterday. So first of all, I want to say thank you and welcome to everybody joining us for our virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in. We certainly wish this was happening in person, but we also know that maybe some folks are able to join us for this virtual event that wouldn't have been able to join us out in D.C. in person. So hopefully we're opening this event up to a broader swath of people who wouldn't have been able to participate otherwise. So thank you again for joining us. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment and just thank our sponsors. Our title sponsor for this virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in is Chevron. Chevron has been unwavering in their support of Club 20. And even, during the pandemic, when things really seemed a little bit sketchy, Chevron was one of the first to say, no, we want to continue to support the good work that Club 20 does. So thank you so much to Carrie Baird and the team for your continued support. Our additional sponsors include Mark and Kathy Fackler as our general sponsor. Mark and Kathy were new members not long ago and have just jumped in with both feet, have been so generous in supporting our events, and really, I think, have improved the conversations of Club 20. So Mark and Kathy, thank you so much for your generous support. And the digital briefing book that you should have all received by email, the little flip book that we made for you, was sponsored by Executive Security International and Rocky Mountain Health Plans. So thank you to those folks for sponsoring that briefing book. Before we introduce our first speaker, I want to turn it over to Merritt just to give any remarks that he may have, and then we'll jump right in. Merritt?
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christian. First of all, thank you all for being on the call, and especially thanks to Christian for putting this all together. I know it's a big lift to get all these people lined up and putting together this great agenda. We had a great set of meetings yesterday, and I'm looking forward to that again today. And also thanks to Brittany and Julia. I know that they're kind of in the background in all this and keeping the plane flying, putting all the nuts and bolts in the right place. So thank you to Brittany and Julia for doing that. And thank you everyone for being on the call. This is really where the legislative people and the leaders of these organizations and agencies can hear from us. We're the boots on the ground people. So thank you, the DC staffers and personnel, for joining us. And thank you all for the Club 20 people that are on this call. And as Christian said, I am Merritt Linke. I'm the Club 20 chair. I'm also a Grand County Commissioner at Headwaters of the Colorado. And back to you, Christian. We'll get started.
Thanks, Merritt. So our first speaker kicking things off today is Lynn Granger. She is the Executive Director of the American Petroleum Institute, whose mission is to promote safety across the industry globally and to influence public policy in support of a strong, viable oil and natural gas industry. Lynn is here this morning to give us an update on the current status of oil and gas. And Lynn, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Christian. I appreciate the invite, and good morning, everyone. Looks like a great group here this morning. So really what I wanted to do was, I've got a slide presentation, but pretty informal, that I'd like to run through. Can I just share my screen, Christian?
Yes.
Okay. Can you all see that?
We can see the PowerPoint version.
Great. How's that? Okay.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So I thought I would just start with kind of a broad kind of national overview of kind of where we are, and then focus specifically on Colorado, if that's okay. And I'll stop in between those two, and if there's any questions or comments or discussion, would love to do that as well. Just a little bit of background on API for those of you who might not be familiar. So we're the American Petroleum Institute. We have an office specifically specific to Colorado. API really represents all facets of the natural gas and oil industry. We have about 600 members nationally that produce, process, and distribute most of the nation's energy. We're actually about 100 years old. We started as a standard setting organization, and we actually now have about 700 standards to enhance operational, environmental safety, efficiency, and sustainability. And we are really committed here to enduring a strong, viable industry capable of meeting the energy needs of not only the state, but the nation in an environmentally responsible manner. So just a bit about API. So we'll jump in. So just some key points again, just broadly speaking, I think there's a narrative out there, from last year, from 2020, when obviously there was a large downturn in the industry that, oh, this is kind of the beginning of the end for demand for, natural gas and oil and just a lot of rhetoric out there. And I'm just going to go through a few slides. Obviously that is absolutely not the case. And, long-term demand for oil and gas is incredibly strong. And we're starting to see a rebound here. So right now the economy is on track. Expectations are for the strongest 2-year economic growth since 1972 and 73. Our industry usually changes in tandem with the economy. So that is good news for us. The global oil market, the recovery is in progress. We're seeing that. We're seeing record growth right now. The Energy Information Administration projects a growth of 5.4 million barrels of oil per day in 2021, and then that continued growth of an additional 3.7 in 2022, with record 2-year gains expected by the end of Q4 in 2022. And so who gains from that? Every producing region could participate in that recovery, of course, but U.S. production recovery does remain a question, and we'll get more into that when I talk specifically about Colorado and kind of the unique challenges that our industry faces here and why Colorado's been, as far as natural gas and oil, a little slower to recover than the rest of the nation. Just another fact, petroleum demand, 19.6 million barrels per day in April of 2021. This is pretty amazing, climbed to within 3.5% of the Q1 2019 level. So with everything that happened in 2020, it's pretty amazing to see that we are growing and recovering fairly strongly across the board to be within that 3.5% of the pre-pandemic levels, which is great. And then just a bit, a note on natural gas, that strong productivity helps sustain production despite historically low drilling activity last year. So next, this is really just a graph, and sorry, you guys are, I can't see my slides because I see all of you, but I still want to see all of you. This really just shows kind of some of those indicators and what we look at to see what that demand is going to be, and it's industrial and chemical production, what daily flights look like, mobility statistics, vehicle miles traveled, and kind of tracking what that looks like. Obviously, you can see from here, things are increasing very quickly and very significantly, which is great news. The other piece of that is motor fuels. And so we're now showing single digit again with the 3.5 within 3.5% of 2019, just petroleum demand in general, specifically motor fuels, were in the single digit percentage declines from 2019 levels. So really, again, great news, especially with everything that occurred last year. So here we're just talking the price of oil for per barrel and what EIA projects in 2022. Again, just another indication that we are definitely on track. We've been hovering the last couple of weeks around kind of the mid 60s for per barrel, and EIA estimates that we'll see at least $60 per barrel or more going into 2022. Okay, So this is just kind of looks specifically to basins and what we're seeing. So again, EIA reported oil well productivity fell by more than 6% year to date in both the Permian and the DJ here in Colorado. Here on this slide, what I really want to point out, and again, we'll talk about this when we get more Colorado specific, but if you see over to the right of the screen, we kind of look at break-even prices and comparing April 2021 to April 2020. And so for the DJ in particular, you can see that the break even in the DJ was about $40, and now we're looking at about 60. So again, just a little slower to recover here than the rest of the nation. All right, and this slide I threw in, this is actually just one of my favorite slides that I like to show, and I'm waiting for our data to be updated for 2020. But as you can see, you know, spending on other household needs has grown exponentially over the last decade or so. Healthcare, education, food, while household energy amazingly has declined, and that's because of our great American energy revolution, all the technology and innovation. You know, again, because of COVID and everything that happened, we are importing natural gas and oil, unfortunately. But prior to the pandemic, we were a net exporter of natural gas and oil for the first time in 75 years, which we all can be very proud of. Helps you know, promote our national security, helps keep those energy, you know, household energy costs very low. So I just like to kind of throw that out there because I think that's very interesting for folks. All right, so that is kind of the broad national outlook. I'll kind of pause there. Any questions or comments, any discussion before I move on and talk more Colorado specific?
So far, I've only seen a question of if you'd be willing to share your PowerPoint with us so we can share it out to our members, because there's some really good data in there.
Yes, absolutely. I'd be happy. I will send that over to you when we conclude here, Christian.
And then Kathy Fackler said, API recently announced it would advocate for an economy-wide carbon price. Your framework seems consistent with the Climate Leadership Council's carbon fee and dividend policy. Can you speak to the benefits of that approach versus a patchwork of state and federal regulation?
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Kathy. Thank you so much. So yeah, we rolled out recently what we're calling our climate action framework, and it's kind of a 5-point plan, and supporting a price on carbon is part of that plan, of course, with some caveats, right? It's got to be economy wide. It's got to be market based. We do want to see that more at the federal level. And I think as we talk specifically about Colorado, we actually faced this issue not too long ago over at our Air Quality Control Commission, where there was a request for rulemaking from some environmental NGOs that would basically establish a cap and trade program, but just for Colorado. And we had to work through that, again, kind of walking this line of, yes, we do support this price on carbon, but is a Colorado only approach the right way to get there? And we don't think that it is. It would, you know, really end up being more of a cap program here in Colorado if it was just implemented in the state. And really the basis of our climate action framework, and these are you know, concepts and things that our members have been talking about for a very long time, and a lot of our member companies support or do in some form or fashion, you know, across the nation. And so really we wanted to try to compile that into this framework. You know, our industry, it's real tough. We always kind of get accused of being against everything. You know, you don't want to come to the table, you're, you know, railing against, saying no, no, no to all of these things. And we thought, you know what can we collectively come together and be for? You know, we want to say, yes, we really feel like we are problem solvers. We are part of the solution to addressing, you know, the impacts of climate change, you know, again, through innovation, technology. Gosh, in Colorado, we've been able to quadruple production here since 2010, while simultaneously reducing emissions by 50%. So it's really incredible what we've been able to do. And so we really wanted to present this as a, here is, you know, we want to be part of the solution, and here are things that we think that we can do to help that in that effort. And so that's our framework. And we Again, it's a little tricky because there are nuances and there are caveats to, what we support or think would be, a feasible path forward. But carbon pricing is definitely one of those things that our members kind of got together and said, you know what, that we can get behind that. So we're pretty excited about that framework. Kathy, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did, yes. Thank you so much, and I'm very pleased with the framework that you've outlined there. So keep
Great.
on keeping on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited about it as well. So appreciate that. Thank you so much for the question.
I don't see any others at the moment, but I'm sure there will be more to come.
All right, sounds good. And this is just api.org, our website. And then I kind of circled our chief economist there, does a really fabulous industry outlook. And there's just a ton of awesome information. If you're interested, please visit our website, and this information, along with a lot of other really great statistics and data, are available there. So just wanted to throw that in there. Okay, so I will move on to some Colorado specific information, and here we go. So really just want to talk economic impact of the oil and gas industry in Colorado. So this is before 2020, before the pandemic. So we were 5th in the nation for oil production and 6th for natural gas, which is not insignificant. I think a lot of folks, because we do operate, I mean, obviously it's become, a lot more apparent, here in recent years, but I think prior to that, we operated mostly in very rural areas, and a lot of folks didn't really realize that Colorado is an oil and gas state. And we're surprised to know that we are, 5th and 6th in the nation, respective to oil and natural gas. So we employ 89,000 direct and indirect jobs in Colorado. More than 340,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs, Colorado industry-wide. We have about a $47 billion annual economic impact, 10.8 billion in employee income to Colorado households. And then we do provide about $1 billion in public revenue each year, 600 million of which goes to K through 12 education, which we're very proud of. And this, again, just another slide kind of showing that that economic impact, and the taxes, 1.4 billion to state coffers. Again, these were 2019 numbers, but this money has usually historically been used to and been vital to the balance the budget here in Colorado. So that just shows a breakdown between severance taxes, vehicle operator's license, and motor fuels. Okay, so kind of going into 2020 and the impact. So not only, obviously, I know the entire economy was hurt by the impacts of COVID-19 last year. We also were facing a Saudi-Russia price war last year that occurred in about March and April, which really had devastating effects on our industry. So not only did we kind of start with that and then go into, all of the effects of COVID and the downturn, but those two things were really rough for our industry last year. We saw futures in the negatives, which we had never seen before, which was really crazy there for a short period of time. Right here you can see, so we had here in Colorado, fewer rigs and of course less production. So summer of 2019, we were hovering around 31 rigs in the state. Summer of 2020, that dropped to 4. Right now we are about at 10 rigs. So we're getting there. Again, just a little bit slower. Unfortunately, we had job losses just like everyone else, and had about 9,000 direct jobs lost last year from March to December. Nationally, there was about 100,000 direct jobs lost in the oil and gas industry last year. So before I kind of talk about the industry outlook here, particularly in Colorado, I think it's important to just provide some context and take a little bit of a step back. So I won't spend a lot of time, but just want to give you all a little bit of history of kind of where we have come from. And we've had a lot happen in the last year or two that have had significant impacts to our industry that will really affect what our outlook looks like going forward here in the state. So again, there was a big narrative out there that, you know, the industry here was largely sort of unregulated. We sort of did what we want. We called our own shots sort of thing. And that's just not accurate. You know, we've, before going into Senate Bill 181 in 2019, we already had some of the strongest regulations in the nation here in Colorado for oil and natural gas. And that was because of what you see here from 2010 to 2018. These were different rulemakings that we participated in throughout those years. And then moving on to kind of 2018 to now. So a lot of legislative and political changes that we face. So of course we had a huge proposition in 2018, which was Prop 112 that would have imposed a blanket 2,500 foot setback on new energy development throughout the state. Fortunately, that measure was defeated by, you know, a 55 to 45% margin. And of course, as you all know, same election, you know, Jared Polis was elected, and then the Democrats, Democrats took full control of the state and the legislature. So we were obviously happy to defeat that proposition. Would have had devastating consequences on the state, but a few very short months later, we rolled into the 2019 legislative session, and right out of the gate, we saw Senate Bill 181. And so that was introduced in March. The process was very, very quick. There was really no stakeholdering. It was signed into law the very next month, again, 5 short months after the defeat of 112. So what did 181 do? It really changed the COGCC, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission's mission, changed from fostering oil and gas development here in the state to regulating it. It prescribed about a dozen rulemakings, both at the Oil and Gas Commission and at the Air Quality Control Commission, to really reform Colorado's regulatory code. I mean, we are opening up every rule on the books and have and significant changes to all of those regulations. Again, going into all of this, having already some of the strongest regulations in the nation on the books. Another big piece of 181, it provided local governments with greater authority to regulate surface operations as well. So we're starting to see and have seen over the past about year and a half, a lot of local governments either revising their rules and regulations. If they didn't have rules and regulations, they're developing them and putting those on the books as well. We've seen a number of moratoriums on natural gas and oil. Again, 181 was not intended to be a vehicle for local governments to have an outright ban on oil and natural gas by any means, but we have seen a number of local jurisdictions enact like 6-month moratoriums with the premise that, oh, we're updating our rules and regulations, so we're going to have this moratorium while we kind of take a look at everything. And so obviously those have been very concerning to us, and we work very closely with those local governments as well. So same year, we also had House Bill 1261 pass. This bill set unprecedented statewide goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, later kind of codified by the state's greenhouse gas roadmap, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail here. Also directed the state AAQCC to promulgate rules and implement policies in support of the reduction goals laid out in House Bill 1261. So just a little more kind of detailed information about that regulatory overhaul that I mentioned from Senate Bill 181. So we've gone through, since the passage of that, a number of rulemakings. The biggest one really was our mission change rulemaking. Again, the COGCC goes from fostering to regulating natural gas and oil here in the state. Again, this was kind of our big rulemaking. It occurred last year. It was supposed to run starting in August, about 6 weeks. We went from mid-August to right before Thanksgiving. So it was 3 months of 8 hours a day on Zoom and rulemakings, and it was fairly painful. But we got through it, opened up every regulation on the books. The one most concerning thing that came out of that rulemaking was Colorado now has a 2,000-foot what they are calling soft setbacks. So that means there are a few off ramps for operators still to get permits approved within 2,000 feet, but the scrutiny and the process to do that is very intensive. And so those rules that we went through that rulemaking for that ended right before Thanksgiving were actually implemented in January of this year. So we're still kind of working through what that looks like and kind of what our new regulatory environment looks like as far as getting permits approved and that sort of thing within this new regulatory framework. So we're very hopeful that we'll find some stability and certainty for the industry, but I think having that 2,000-foot soft setback really makes it tricky, again, to have that stability and certainty for us right now. So what do we have left? So coming up this year, we've got 3 rulemakings left as prescribed by 181 over at the COGCC. One of those is financial assurance and permit fees. That will occur likely in October of this year. We also have worker safety and certification, which was supposed to occur this year, but I think they're going to be moving that to 2022. And then I won't go through all of this because it's horribly technically complicated, but again, just another snapshot over at what we've been also doing at the Air Quality Control Commission as it relates to our industry. Some of this prescribed by 181, some not. But we did have, the greenhouse gas inventory rulemaking that was completed in 2020. We also have been doing a lot of work around the state's ozone non-attainment area and our state implementation plan as well. More to follow this year on that. And then some additional rulemakings that we have coming up this year. One is Regulation 20 and 22 and air quality standards that's planned for this year. And then a big one for us will be the greenhouse gas inventory, it will be a continuation from a rulemaking we had last year as well. So a little bit more just on the greenhouse gas roadmap that I mentioned. So this was part of the governor's plan to 100% renewable energy goal by 2040. And you can see kind of what the roadmap aims to reduce greenhouse gas pollution by. So 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050. And this is all from the 2005 levels. So obviously this plan touches many sectors, but definitely points to some significant and further action and reduction from the natural gas and oil industry here in the state. And just to give you all too, just an idea of, Colorado has changed obviously politically, I think significantly in the last couple of years. And this was a very aggressive plan by the governor, one of the most aggressive in the nation. So we have, certainly, again, we want to be at the table. We want to be part of the solution and part of the conversations. But what we're facing is, again, this plan being very aggressive. These are goals. But what we saw this legislative session was Senate Bill 200, which this roadmap was rolled out at the beginning of this year. So, we're getting started. A lot of work has gone into this roadmap from the Colorado Energy Office, and right away, we saw this Senate bill that would, no, you're not doing enough, you're not moving fast enough, and here's this, we're going to codify these goals to make them mandates, and we want to put it in statute and, require the AQCC to get all of this done. Again, those commissioners are a volunteer commission as well and do not, have the expertise by any means to implement something like that. And so the governor has come out and said he, plans to veto that particular piece of legislation, which is good news, but you can see just, being pushed and pushed and pushed and just very frustrating for us and utilities and all the folks that are, have been part of this and at the table and trying to be part of the solution is very frustrating when we just continually see things like that. So just a quick conclusion. So as you can see, Senate Bill 181, between that and 1261, really, again, the complete overhaul of how we're regulated here in Colorado. And we're still ongoing here in 2021 and 2022 with additional rulemakings. Of course, the Energy Office is implementing greenhouse gas roadmap. And then really, I just wanted to talk about, again, touch on kind of Colorado's recovery here and that being slower than the rest of the nation. So I think, again, as I mentioned, the break-even prices in the DJ are about $20 over what they were this same time last year. Again, I mentioned kind of that regulatory uncertainty and instability, and I think we've had that in the state for a number of years now. I think our industry sorely needs that going forward. We're really hoping to have that coming out of that very large rulemaking last year, but because of the way they sort of crafted the rules, we still don't have that. And so we've seen a significant reduction in capital being invested here in the state. I think as things come back online and our industry recovers from everything that happened through COVID and the price war last year, a lot of our companies are investing in their most prospective targets and where they're going to, receive that stability and the certainty and the most ROI. And unfortunately, that just isn't Colorado right now because of our regulatory and political environment. So we are very much hoping that this year, again, we start to even out a bit. We see what our new sort of environment is under this new regulatory framework. We start seeing permits. We are very concerned again about that 2,000-foot soft setback becoming more of a hard setback, which would be completely unworkable for the industry. So we're kind of in this wait and see mode, but very much hoping for that stability and certainty and to attract that capital investment back to our great state here in Colorado. So sorry, I know that was quite a bit, but would love to have any questions or discussion or comments, and I'll stop sharing my screen here.
So please type your questions for Lynn into the chat box or use the raise your hand feature and I will recognize you. I want to take the first question here. And, as you've outlined, the industry's gone through a regulatory overhaul as a result of Senate Bill 181. Previously, we had some of the strictest regulations in the country. Now we probably do have some that have the strictest regulations in the country. And the top 5 natural gas producing states are not all conservative states, right? They are a mix. You've got Ohio, you've got Pennsylvania in there. All of that aside, do you have any kind of, not agreement per se, but kind of a gentleman's agreement, I guess, that once these regulations have been put in place, that there's going to be maybe a pause on any new regulations to let these play out before coming back next year, next ballot, initiative cycle with more?
So I wish we did. We sort of had that. So last year there was kind of a ceasefire, if you will, on ballot initiatives at least. So we did have, of course, Colorado Rising was behind the 2018 ballot initiative for Proposition 112, and that setback. They had a number of ballot initiatives they were looking at last year, and so we also started looking at some proactive ballot initiatives and had some conversations with the governor, and the governor, basically said, look, I'm not interested. Let's let 181 play out. I'm not going to support any anti-industry ballot initiatives, but if you industry could also, withdraw or not move forward with your ballot initiatives, then let's let this play out. And so we said, yes, of course, we would very much like that. Again, we need that stability. And so we withdrew very quickly. You saw a lot of environmental NGOs in the press going, we didn't agree to that, and we plan on moving forward with X, Y, and Z. And so again, I wish I could say that we did have some sort of gentleman's agreement, but unfortunately, I think a lot of the ENGOs, you know, again, they want oil and gas out of the state. You know, they don't want stronger regulations. They don't want it occurring here at all. And I think that's their goal, and that's what they'll continue to work on. You know, both at the on the regulatory front, both at the AQCC and the COGCC, and then over at the ballot box as well, and then also at the legislature. I think, as I mentioned, Senate Bill 200. Of course, that was a Faith Winter piece of legislation, but written entirely by some of the more active environmental NGOs here. And so I think it will continue to be a constant struggle here in Colorado for this industry, unfortunately. But I think for the industry, we are super resilient. You know, at the end of the day, I think we put our money where our mouth is. Again, I mentioned we've, you know, through innovation, technology, you know, climate action framework, and all of that, we continue to produce the energy we all need and use while reducing emissions and trying to come to the table and actually solve the problem. So
Thank you. We have 3 comments and about 3 minutes, so we'll have to make these snappy. Kathy Well asks if you have any comment on beneficial electrification.
Good question. Thank you. We actually have been in a monitor position mostly on, there's a number of beneficial electrification pieces of legislation out there, and I know there's a lot of conversation around that. I think, again, with everything, there are caveats and where that goes and what it entails, and the devil's in the details. I think we have a few concerns, but we've largely been monitoring that conversation and where that's heading here in the state.
Thank you. Nancy Fishering said, I also hear that the gas roadmap isn't realistic with today's technology. Is any group coming up with a set of good data and story mapping to tell the reality of 100% renewable energy?
Yes, so that definitely continues to be a challenge for us. You know, we always say having realistic conversations about, you know, these goals and how we can get there is becoming harder and harder by the day. We are working on that. It's really tough for us, Nancy. As you probably know, we're always not the best messenger on things like that. So we really try to work with third parties to, you know, work on studies and evaluate things like that and have them be more the voice there. But yes, absolutely. We try to insert, you know, the facts and you know, just realistic conversation into all of this, because at the end of the day, yes, some of these things are not attainable. And I think we're seeing that again, utilities for sure starting to be a little more vocal about what is in the realm of possibility and what is not as well, which I think is incredibly helpful. And we could use that voice to, but yes, short answer is yes, we definitely try to do that.
Ray Beck, if you will make your question very quick.
Yeah, thank you, Christian, and thank you, Lynn. It's been a great presentation. As you know, and we feel your pain, obviously, from a local government standpoint, we depend on the severance tax and the mineral lease money that comes into the state of Colorado and defers to the Department of Local Affairs for opportunities to provide grants for capital projects. And of course, when you guys are embalmed with more regulations, it hurts local governments as well. So thank you for all that you do, number one. I guess my question is what can Club 20 do for you guys? If there's anything that we can do, write letters or testify, I don't know what that looks like from your perspective, but we'd be willing to do whatever we can. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ray. I really appreciate that. And absolutely, we welcome, you know, just all sorts of engagement. And Christian is really great and supportive. I think luckily this year anyway, we've, you know, had a few issues pop up, but nothing really large, at least at the legislature, with the governor, you know, promising to veto Senate Bill 200. I think go forward, you know, really our next big fight is going to be over at the Air Quality Control Commission. And I think there's a number of things that they they can do to really hurt the industry. And so I think engagement there is going to be very, very important, not just for us, but the entire business community as a whole in the state, for sure. So thank you, Ray. Really appreciate that, and look forward to working with you all.
And also the Senate Bill 260, which is the transportation funding bill, creates a couple new enterprise boards that will have some level of rulemaking authority, I have found out. So I've been trying to work to make sure there's a clearly defined scope of that rulemaking authority, but there's also potential impacts depending on what rules they choose to promulgate from that perspective to try to incentivize the clean fleet for trucking fleets for electric vehicles, and then also the expansion of electric vehicle charging stations around the state. So that'll be something we watch as well. Merritt, last question.
All right, thank you, Kristen. And actually, Ray kind of stole one of my questions about what can Lub 20 do, so I really appreciate that. Thanks, Ray. I have a quick question, probably has a long answer, and if you can't take it, that's fine. But mine is really kind of a crystal ball question, and that is, as we transition to more and more green energy and electrified cars and all these things, what does that lead to the future for the oil and gas industry? Because there's some schools of thought and probably some pretty solid research that as we go to more electric power and green so-called green power, it's going to require even more oil and gas than we have now in order to build these facilities and to do all the mining to get all the metals and the materials needed for windmills and solar farms. So that's just what's the crystal ball answer in the future of the oil and gas industry as we transition to more and more electric power?
So thank you for the question. I get that a lot. If I had $1 for every time. So I think, and I'll try to be really quick, Christian, I know you're on a tight timeline, but as I said, this morning when I started out the presentation, the long-term demand for oil and gas remains very, very strong. And I know that there are all of these goals of 100% renewable by, this day and this day. And again, going back to facts and reality, the reality is you can't have wind and solar without our industry. And you don't have the reliability without our industry. And so I know a lot of folks want to point to countries like Germany and say, why can't we be like Germany? They're, almost 100% reliable on renewables is like something I hear, which is absolutely false. That makes up 7% of their energy, and it's all backed up by oil and natural gas. And so I think
From Russia.
But yes.
From Russia, natural gas, they get their natural gas from Russia. I was just in Germany talking about this. They get 90% of their natural gas from Russia.
Which I'm sure do not have the same strict, regulations and environmental concerns that we have here in Colorado, for sure. So I think, at the end of the day, there is a lot of rhetoric out there. It is a lot of, kind of myth busting and trying to put out facts as much as we can. But the long-term demand is very strong. And I see natural gas and oil being a part of the energy mix for a very long time. Our companies are, always looking to. Sorry, I'm moving, and my movers have arrived at my house. Investing in the renewable space, API always says it's an all of the above solution. It is wind, it is solar, it is natural gas, it is oil, but it can't be a none of the below. Right? It's going to be that mix, and moving forward, and oil and gas will be part of that mix for a very, very long time. So.
Oh, thank you so much for your presentation, Lynn. Really appreciate it. And there was one question. I know your movers are there, so if you could respond in the chat, great. If not, no big deal. But we sure appreciate your time this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. It was such a pleasure joining you. Really appreciate all of the support. Club 20 is such a great organization. And I hope you all enjoy.
They're here. Thanks,
you.
Lynn.
Bye.
So our next speaker is Brock Herzberg. Brock is the coordinator for the Colorado Business Coalition for Immigration Solutions. in their daily efforts to assist Colorado businesses to find workable solutions on immigration reform. He is the principal owner of Capital Focus, a government affairs firm in Denver. And before starting Capital Focus, Brock worked as a full-time employee for the Western Dairy Association, serving as the executive director of the Colorado Dairy Political Action Trust and Political Action Committee. Brock, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for giving us an update on immigration reform efforts today.
Yeah, Christian, thank you for having me. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Oh, you're
Great.
are you at the Capitol?
Yes, I left here at 11 o'clock last night
Oh,
and got here a little while ago. And I was glad I was able to jump on. Lynn Granger with API Colorado is actually a client of mine. So Lynn and I were talking until about 11 o'clock last night and started again about 7:30 this morning. So there's a lot going on down here at the Capitol in Denver, as I know that you all are very aware of. So I appreciate, Christian, you all inviting me. She is correct. I own my own government affairs firm here in Denver and I've been lobbying in Colorado for about 20 years. Did a stint in Washington, D.C. If any of you can remember, which I'm sure you can, Senator Wayne Allard. I worked for him on the Hill in Washington and actually did a brief stint for about 4 years in Richmond, Virginia, where I worked for the Virginia Farm Bureau out there. And I've also worked for the Colorado Farm Bureau here. Speaking to you all today in capacity, like Christian said, for the Colorado Business Coalition of Immigration Solutions. We are a nonpartisan group of about 50 organizations across Colorado. And those organizations are groups like Club 20, Action 22, Pro 15, the Denver Metro Chamber, the Westminster Chamber, the Hotel and Lodging Association, all different industry sectors that really power the economy here in Colorado. And we were born out of a desire about 10 years ago for Colorado to try and speak with one voice on immigration, and on immigration reform, knowing that we all have differing opinions, that some pieces of legislation work for some industry sectors and some pieces of legislation do not work for some industry sectors. A couple of the members of the Colorado Business Coalition for Immigration Solutions, I represent the dairy farmers. We have a very fundamentally different view than some of our brethren in the agriculture community, but what we have found is that it's easier to try and speak with one voice as we are talking to not only our congressional delegation, but also our elected officials here in Colorado. We're really guided by, we don't take a lot of hard stances on anything because we know that immigration is such a hot topic issue. What we really try and say, we lead ourselves with some principles around robust reform that works for everyone and not just one sector of the economy, and really what works for the business industry in Colorado, whether you be a dairy farmer, a dry cleaning business, a wool grower on the Western Slope, a construction company. We really try and at least convene the groups to talk about immigration reform with our elected officials, like I said, both here in Colorado and at the national level. We have done a couple virtual fly-ins, most like what you all are doing now, with some congressional staff over the last couple of months to try and get a handle on what is happening, or I think a better term, what may not be happening in Washington, D.C., which I know that we are all very familiar with. Washington, D.C. moving at a very, very glacial pace. So I'll give you all just a quick highlight, and I have to say it's nice talking to you all with Club 20. I grew up in Akron, Colorado. My family farms south of Akron, about 20 miles. And I enjoy talking to folks out there, but, we're not separated by that many miles, but agriculture on the Eastern Plains, my family, we have a dryland wheat, corn, and millet farm. fundamentally different than some of the cattle operations, the sheep operations, agriculture on the Western Slope, and just the economy of the Western Slope. And it means so much to all of Colorado. And Club 20, you all have been great advocates, both here in Denver at the Capitol, and then also helping push some conversations at the national level. So I really appreciate that. Just to give you a pretty quick overview of where things are at in Washington, D.C. I know that after the Biden administration came in, probably one of the top two dominant conversations was immigration reform. I think people on both sides of the conversation, meaning Democrats, Republicans, pro-reform Republicans, anti-reform Republicans, pro-reform Democrats, anti-reform Democrats, and everybody in between, I think came into 2021 thinking that this may be the year that Congress moves on immigration reform. If you all remember, the last big push came when Senator Bennett, out of Colorado, obviously, was originally elected, and he and the quote unquote gang of eight, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, pushed, and Club 20, you all were involved with this, and I helped coordinate some press conferences with you all over on the Western Slope. Colorado really coalesced around some of their ideals that they were putting forward, and that it was received with much fanfare in Washington, D.C. Again, this was 8 years ago, and then obviously stalled out. It passed the Senate with huge bipartisan support, dealt with agriculture, and some undocumented workers that are here. It was a pretty broad package, stalled in the House, and then we never really heard too much more about reform. The Obama administration, they executive ordered some stuff, but never really took up wholesale reform. The Trump administration executive ordered some stuff, and Congress never really dealt with immigration reform. So fast forward to now, like I was saying, coming into 2021, a lot of people, both in the countryside here and in the Beltway, were certain, and the best laid plans were always just that, the best laid plans were certain that reform was going to happen. The House of Representatives passed a package, and really just 2 bills, out of their chamber and sent them over to the Senate. And starting in about February or March, there began this pretty big nationwide push amongst industry sectors, construction, tourism, agriculture, small businesses, to really see if this wasn't the time to get immigration reform moving in the Senate, and see if we couldn't get something through Congress, and possibly something to put on the Biden administration's desk to either sign, veto, or do with what they want. Those 2 big issues, which I'm sure you've all heard about, that the House of Representatives passed, one was the Dream and Promise Act. This one probably received, and you all probably saw this, an immense amount of media attention. This dealt with the Dreamers, those people who have been born here by people who are not citizens of this country, have not gone through the formal process, about 3 to 4 million of that category. The House passed, like I said, the Dream and Promise Act, passed it over to the Senate, and people thought that may get some attention. There was a lot of Senate debate internally, not on the floor, but again, kind of a gang of 10 or 12 bipartisan senators came together and said, can we get there on this Dream and Promise Act? That has since stalled. There doesn't seem to be much desire in the Senate to take up a bill like that. I think you're even hearing from some of the more conservative to moderate Democrats, the handful that are in the Senate, that are starting to kind of say some of the same things that some of the Senate Republicans are saying. We will deal with this when we deal with border security, when we deal with the workers who are already here. So hence, The House then passed over the Farm Worker Modernization Act. And while this did, it has farm worker in the bill, it did deal with quite a bit of other issues. There is not general consensus on the Farm Worker Modernization Act, even within the agriculture industry. Farm Bureau obviously plays a huge role. My client, Dairy Farmers of America, our industries have been working together to try and really find common ground on that. Those conversations around that, and I think the biggest one in play right now, if it moves, will be the Farm Worker Modernization Act. And I think that is a big if. I really do want to caveat if with an exclamation point after it, because what you're seeing is people in the Senate feel that should be, if there is going to be a piece of legislation move, that it should be the Farm Worker Modernization Act. It deals with about 10 to 12 million workers that are here. Part of the contention is that it would allow them a path to citizenship without really having to start over, or to go home and then come back over through the legal process that our country has set up. So there's some questions around there. Some of the Republicans and the more moderate Democrats are saying that they want to deal with what's going on at the border before that we pass anything major, or that it be a component of that we need a secure border. We need to stop the overflow that's coming into the country, or at least be able to get our arms around it from a security and a national security standpoint. So you're seeing kind of these two bills, the DREAM Act and then the Farm Worker Modernization Act, essentially come together, and they have stalled out. Some of the more progressive Democrats have said that they will not let the Farm Worker Modernization Act move unless the Republicans agree to some sort of variation of the DREAM Act that would deal with the dreamers and those kids that have been born here by parents that are not documented citizens of the country. And you're seeing Republicans the Senate is so evenly divided, saying they will not take up the DREAM Act unless in the Farm Worker Modernization Act, there is clear, plain, extensive language around border security. Good Lord, I'm sorry, my brain is running on empty. Want to deal with border security, and they want a different suggestion than just allowing 10 to 12 million people to kind of cut in line in our system and automatically be started to be granting citizenship when there have been people that have been going through the legal process that may have been waiting 5, 10, 15 years to go through the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. in order to obtain legal status. So those two bills have kind of somewhat converged on each other. Some of the things that I think that folks out in the Western Slope, there's been a lot of talk around the visa reform aspect. H-2A is a huge topic of conversation for the agriculture industry. Obviously, that deals with seasonal workers. What is being advocated in the current structure of the legislation is to let all of agriculture enjoy the H-2A or be able to apply to the H-2A program. Full cards on the table. That makes a lot of people in the ag industry nervous because dairy, we have not been a part of that system. But if you allow us to start applying for these H-2A visas, they've capped them and they've raised the caps, but they've capped them. The cap at which they have put on with the amount of workers that are employed by dairy farms across the country, we almost double the amount of visas. So, and I think it's completely fair for those in the more seasonal aspect of the fruit and vegetable growers. Some of the vintners are very concerned about that, and those are very honest, difficult conversations to have. But visa reform is something that, at least from Colorado, we have been pushing for, that there needs to be the caps on for a country our size with the amount of workers that are needed needs to be addressed. We are trying to address the issue of are we skipping a person, a citizen who is already here in order to hire somebody who's on a visa, maybe if to hire them at a lower rate. There's trying to be, or lower wage, I should say. There are discussions ongoing about how they would word that would an employer have to exhaust a few things to show or to document that they have really tried to find workers that are here, that are maybe citizens here or here already on visas before we start kind of skipping people and just hiring undocumented workers. So there's a lot of conversations going on around that. On the Farm Worker Modernization Act, as I'm sure you've all heard, Senator Bennett, again, out of Colorado, has said that he would sponsor the legislation. He is doing that in tandem with a Republican out of Idaho, Senator Tom Crapo, C-R-A-P-O. And Senator Crapo is a huge Western advocate for agriculture and for protecting agriculture's interest. And that is part of the reason I've had multiple conversations with Senator Bennett and his staff that they really went to Senator Crapo is because he is known as one of the Western senators that really looks out for all sectors of the ag industry. Idaho obviously has some pretty big grain industries. Their dairy industry there is very large, and he is really trying to thread that needle of working through a lot of these issues for us. But having said all of that, back in March, I think if I would have been talking to you all then, I would have said there's a 75% chance that something would move. Now I don't even know that I would handicap this at 50%. As we all know, as Congress has been meeting, I think they've been coming back into their districts and hearing that there are some major issues with this conversation. And there is a hesitancy now to move anything out of the Senate, because if the votes are not going to be there, why bog down the chamber in it? Why create another debate around this when they know nothing is going to happen? So for now, conversations, I think, formally have stalled out. Informally, they are still happening to see if something can move forward. And you know, Congress, they'll meet for a while now, then they'll take their summer break, and you know, that's a couple months where they'll spend time in the district. And I would assume you all might hear from Senator Bennett on that. Senator Hickenlooper has been involved in these conversations, but not nearly to the length that Senator Bennett has. So I think the chances are slim that something moves right now. And I just, you know, then you move into 2022, it's an election cycle for the House of Representatives, for a large number of Senate members in seats that are very vulnerable on both sides of the aisle for Democrats and Republicans. And I think there is now starting to be some hesitancy of taking on a major issue like this when we are already 6 months into, or almost 6 months into 2021 and staring down, you know, a 3 or 4 month debate on immigration that then leads into 2022, which is an election cycle. So I really don't want to, you know, give you guys false information. And I'll kind of to Christian's or somebody's question to Lynn about crystal balling this. If I were, again, to crystal ball it, I don't see the likelihood that the Senate actually moves something this year happens. I think there's so much politics going on around this issue, around federal spending the way it is now, around this infrastructure package that is going to start being debated again in Congress. The mood to deal with something as lightning rod as immigration reform can be, I think you're starting to see the temperature go down on people who were very heated up 3 months ago to say, we have to do it now, we have to do it now, to now saying, well, this might not be the right time. So like I said, those two pieces of legislation, the DREAM Act and the Farm Worker Modernization Act, have stalled. I don't think the Dream Workers Act, I don't think there's any hope that it moves. I think if anything does move, whether it's in the next 6 months or the next 18 months, the vehicle will probably be the Farm Worker Modernization Act. That is the vehicle that the labor unions want to move forward with, which obviously makes a lot on in the Republican and in the ag industry very uncomfortable, and the general business community uncomfortable. So there's a lot up in the air right now, and I think it's just for lack of desire to really take the lid off of this and see what happens inside the Beltway. So with that, I'll answer any questions the best that I can. If I can't, I'm more than happy to get information to Christian so she can forward it on to you all. But again, I appreciate you guys asking me to give you a brief, albeit not very exciting update on where immigration reform is right now in Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Brock. And I'm not sure if your time overlapped, but our next speaker is actually Ian Lyle.
Oh, yeah,
So
great.
we got an Allard crew today.
Yeah, that's great. It's kind of funny now, just in my professional life, how many people I run into that were former Allard staffers, either here in the state or back in DC. So
Yep, definitely. Well, Nancy put a question into the chat. She says, what is the current H-2A cap? We don't really have to prove that no workers apply for a seasonal job before we get an H-2A job. Also in Colorado and some other states are requiring overtime pay and efforts to increase H-2A wages. And do you see this on any existing bills?
Well, it's actually funny, Nancy, that you bring that up, because currently in our General Assembly here in Denver, there is a bill out there that deals with overtime, and we've been working tirelessly on this for the last 3 months, that deals with overtime that would impact H-2A workers. Part of the argument that we are making here is you are creating a state law that would directly go into conflict with federal law, and federal statute has supremacy. But we are trying to work that issue, because here in the Dome in Denver, I don't think they care that federal statute has supremacy. They want something here. They want something on the books here, even though we're even getting from the Polis administration a lot of what is in that bill. They could probably be sued over, the state could be, because it would throw into the system into chaos. The cap, I would have to go back and look. But I want to say they raised that. Good Lord, it's 100. It's not a huge number, which it's just appalling. I mean, it's less than a few 100,000 that are available. And it used to be some ridiculous number, like 68,000 were available for the entire country. And I know that there is still talk on getting those cap numbers even higher. And the last conversation I had with Senator Bennett, he also said the same thing, that the cap numbers, even with Biden executive ordering some of this, it's not feasible. Even if you go from 70,000 to 170,000, it's still not even a tip of the iceberg. So in some of those, Nancy, to kind of come full circle, I do think what you would see in the Farm Worker Modernization Act, and this is causing a lot of people heartburn, it would set a minimum wage for those H-2A workers. And that is currently what is being negotiated, because as you all know, there are certain industries, they are price takers, they are not price makers. So we can't negotiate with labor. A lot of industries cannot, the way certain industries can, because they can pass those costs along. Some industries just don't have that ability. And that's part of the reason you don't see the Farm Worker Modernization Act moving, is because of that federal minimum wage requirement now being placed on H-2A workers.
Nancy,
Or that's the thought that it would be.
Did you have a follow-up, Nancy? Are you
Yeah,
on? There
yeah,
you
I
go.
do. Thank you, Brock, because my question is prevailing wage is higher than minimum wage. So how high would they set that?
That it's actually a frightening question, because that's
It-
what we have been trying to figure out. And we have made that argument with Senator Bennett and his staff, and Senator Hickenlooper and his staff, is that how high are you willing to go on some of this? And that's part of the reason some of these conversations have stalled out, or at least hit pause for now, is because nobody can come to an agreement on how that would look. And it's a huge sticking point, Nancy. And I'm glad that you're aware of that. And it's one of the main things that a lot of the business community is starting to say that's just a non-starter for them.
We would have guessed last year was a tipping point where we could barely afford to hire H-2A
Yep.
workers. And yet there was a wage survey in Colorado where they said, what are you going to do? How are you doing farm workers on hiring farm workers? And they go, well, we might have to go to H-2A. And we're going,
Yeah. Nope. And there are a lot of people out there that don't want the H-2A system. They just don't.
Yeah.
There are so many parameters around it. And then if they go ahead and, I mean, they're talking about really beefing up some of the housing, the transportation issues, you put that on top of what you are going to be mandated to pay them, it makes it uneconomical to even do business. It's
last year was a
unfortunate.
tipping point. But you don't see that kind of radical stuff from the Colorado bill seeping into the farm worker modernization?
I do. I think those are some of the, I think those are all conversations that are overlapping and bleeding into each other right now. It's kind of crazy to be having the conversation here in Denver and then bang your head against a wall when you talk to people in Washington, D.C. and say everybody's missing the forest through the trees here.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. It's extraordinarily frustrating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brock, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've probably got a million bills to weigh in on.
Yep.
So I actually am looking at writing a veto request on 87. So
Great.
I may be in touch.
Yes, yeah, let me know. And Christian, I really appreciate you and Club 20, and anything you guys ever think you need from me, just let me know, and happy to provide information.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Have a good day, Brock. Thanks again.
Thanks, you guys too. Talk to you soon. Bye.
So I couldn't be more excited to introduce our next speaker, a personal friend and a great friend to Club 20. Ian Lyle is the Executive Vice President of the National Water Resources Association, who typically hosts our members for a networking reception at their location on E Street in DC. And we have so much fun at that networking reception. It's heartbreaking that we're not enjoying each other's company with a glass of wine and some delicious snacks. Always a crock pot of meatballs for everybody. So hopefully soon.
Yes.
But
Well,
we asked Ian to come and talk about forest management and watershed issues. So Ian, thank you.
Well, and thank you, Christian. I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys today. And I also would be remiss if I didn't note that I'm speaking to people about forest health when I've actually learned from, and watershed issues, when I've actually learned from some of the folks on this call about these very issues. So I see Nancy Fishering on here, and Chris Treese and Ray Beck, all of whom have helped me along my career in understanding natural resource issues. And I'm just appreciative of everything you guys have done throughout your careers and continue to do with Club 20. So I am a little humbled to be briefing the experts, but I'm happy to have that opportunity. So good to see you all. And Christian, is it possible for me to do a screen share?
Yes, you just have to do the button, but you've got full permissions.
All right, I think I can do that. So let's see if this works. All right. You guys see that okay?
Yes,
All right.
perfect.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you all for the opportunity to join you. I've had a lot of good experiences working with Club 20, not just when you guys come back to DC and have an opportunity to go around the Hill, which I think is just such an important thing to do, but really kind of throughout my professional career. some folks might know while I'm stuck in Washington, D.C. right now, my heart still lies in Colorado. That's pretty much where all my family is. And even though I've got the Washington Nationals up on the thing behind me, I've also got my Ed McCaffrey autographed football. So I live in both realms a little bit, but I started working for Senator Wayne Allard a long time ago. At this point, probably 16 or 17 years ago. But one of the first groups that I had an opportunity to work with when I worked for Senator Allard was meeting with Club 20. And so the work that you guys are doing even now and with this conference, even though you're not here in DC, is really important because it connects you with folks that are working on these issues, and it gives you an opportunity to help them stay informed. Because as the last speaker noted, kind of as he was wrapping up his comments, a lot of one of the biggest issues in translating good ideas into good policy is the disconnect between the states where they oftentimes originate and Washington, D.C., where federal operators try to implement them. So the work that Club 20 does in advocating both at the state and federal level is really, really important. So I just want to compliment you all for taking the time to be part of this event. I mentioned I grew up in Colorado. I also went to school on the Western Slope. So this is, folks might recognize the picture. This was taken during the Missionary Ridge Fire outside of Durango, Colorado. That little white house in the foreground with the big raging fire in the background. I was actually living in that house at that time. It's an old farmhouse off County Road 203. We were obviously evacuated, but the picture I think kind of illustrates a couple things. One, that we've been dealing with these catastrophic wildfire issues for several decades at this point. Two, there's an effect to every single community out there. And then what you can't see in this picture is where I'm kind of holding my mouse. There was an irrigation canal that ran right kind of along that part of the ridge. And so obviously with when the fire burns, there's a major impact and a major issue and health and safety concerns that come immediately, both from the threat of the fire damaging people or damaging property, killing people, as well as some of the respiratory issues that come from inhaling all that smoke. But then there's also a long-term effect to our nation's infrastructure and the world that I work in right now, our nation's water infrastructure. So I want to talk a little bit about just kind of, as Christian mentioned, forest management and watershed protection and the intersection of those two areas, which is really important. I'll touch a little bit on the role of forests in our nation's water supply, which I know folks on this line understand is significant, but one of the things we have to work with out here is educating folks about that connection, not just for the Western US, but for parts of the Southeastern US as well. I'll talk a little bit about what the state of our nation's forests look like right now, something that you guys could probably tell me by looking out your windows. And then I will talk a little bit about how the two forest and watershed issues interact with one another. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the policy things going on in DC. And then because Club 20 does such a good job of advocating for Western Colorado, I am also going to highlight a couple ways you guys can help on the forest and watershed front. So feel free to stop me at any point with questions. I might not be able to answer them, but I'll give it my best shot. And if I don't have the information, I will try to dig it up and get it to Christian so she can pass it along. But as you all know, forests play a significant role in water supply. One thing that I always find interesting is that when the Forest Service, its Organic Administration Act was actually passed, there were really two critical things that were noted in there with respect to the creation of the Forest Service. And the first one was it was established to improve and protect the forests or to secure favorable conditions for water flow and to furnish a continuous supply of timber. I think that that's something that we always need to remind folks about. While the forests are a beautiful place for recreating, a great place to ski, great place to hike, a wonderful place for wildlife habitat, and a really important part of our nation's, kind of fabric, they do have some very functional purposes, water supply and timber. And that's largely part of the reason they were placed inside of the Department of Agriculture, because those two resources were viewed as important, but also renewable resources. I know I'm mainly talking about water, but since we have some folks on here that understand the timber aspect, I think it's worth noting that, here in the U.S., we consume we have about 5% of the world's population, I think, but we consume over a quarter of all of the timber resources. And while we produce a lot of that domestically, we are importing timber. And as somebody that has on my summer to-do list rebuilding my back deck, and I just was looking at lumber prices at Home Depot, it's painful. And that's for that's an optional project. I'm not a home builder where I have very thin margins and dealing with the issues you guys were talking about with labor and things like that, but also that timber is a major input, not just for home building, but Congress is talking about a giant infrastructure package, and it's going to play a role there, those increased costs. So in addition to yes, I would happy to share the PowerPoint. There's about 180 million people in 68,000 communities that rely on forest lands to help supply and filter their drinking water. In the West, oftentimes, we talk a lot about water storage, and most of the time people think about reservoirs, and that is really critical. That's one of our main sources of supply. But there's oftentimes a second non-structural reservoir, and that's our snowpack. And when you have a healthy forest and a healthy watershed, the forest is able to hold on to that snowpack longer, delaying its release, slowing the melt, and actually prolonging our water supply longer into the summer, so you don't have to rely as heavily on those structural things like a concrete and steel reservoir. According to the Colorado State Forest Service, about 80% of Colorado residents rely on forested lands for their drinking water. And folks in Colorado aren't alone. Major U.S. cities that might not even be able to see the forest have a real reliance on forest for their water supply. And some of the biggest cities in the U.S., some of the big ones, in obviously Grand Junction, Salt Lake City, Colorado Springs, Denver, Los Angeles, and many others rely on forest lands for their watershed. And one that I always like to mention, which is kind of a misnomer, or not a misnomer, but something a lot of people don't realize, is Atlanta, Georgia is one of those areas that relies on forest lands, federal forest lands, to help get some of their water supply. Atlanta is also one of the cities that has been, outside of the Western U.S., probably having the most contentious water supply issues, with cases going all the way to the Supreme Court in the last few years. So Western water issues that we've been dealing with for decades plus, are starting to be seen in other parts of the U.S. as well. So, kind of looking at the current state of our nation's forests, I wish I had good news here, but as you all probably know, especially in the West, state of the forest is not great. And according to the Forest Service, about 63 million acres of our national forests are at very high risk of being consumed in a catastrophic wildfire. This is a major issue. The Senate Energy Committee actually held a hearing on this, I believe on Tuesday, where they were talking about how severe things are looking, and what last year looked like, and the very real concern about what fire season 2021 is going to look like. And there's a number of reasons that we find ourselves in this situation. There's not any one specific reason. It's like many things, there's numerous reasons, and they're interwoven. Some of the biggest ones, though, are drought and climate, disease, and management. On the drought and climate side of things, it's a really nuanced issue, because the Energy Committee hearing I referenced from earlier this week, that was actually one of the central focuses of it, was what is the state of the forest with respect to climate, and how are they either helping or hindering climate change. As folks probably understand that, when you're growing anything, whether it's your front lawn or a national forest, when that is growing, it's absorbing carbon and putting out oxygen. That's why so many of us like to have houseplants, is because it helps kind of filter the air naturally and put out oxygen. Unfortunately, in many states, and I'll just use California as an example. I know this was the case in Colorado in recent years as well, but last year in California, the forests actually put off more carbon than they absorbed. So much so to the fact that they actually put off more carbon than all the drivers on all the California highways combined. And that's not just because of, it was a COVID-19 year and people were driving less, but it was because they had such a terrible fire season, and the amount of carbon that was kicked off by those fires, you created that situation where there was terrible air quality throughout much of the state, and actually blowing over into other states as well. One of the issues that we continue to look at is how you can utilize that resource and either capture the carbon as it's coming in and it's growing and keep it there. You can even harvest it, as folks here would probably know, and use it in building and construction. And I think that folks in Colorado are actually doing some pretty interesting things on kind of advanced lumber construction technologies, building multi-story buildings out of it, doing some really kind of neat things. So there's an opportunity where you can use the Forest Service lands and state forest lands to help absorb carbon. And I think our forests, if managed correctly, can actually help us address some of the climate issues that we're dealing with right now. Another big one is disease, and Colorado, probably more than any other state, has seen issues with this related to different types of beetles, whether it's the spruce beetle or the pine beetle. I remember driving over from Denver over to Routt County, and as you come over Rabbit Ears Pass, just seeing, looking on either side of you and seeing just acres and acres and acres of standing dead trees, small diameter standing dead trees. Part of that is obviously related to the beetles. And then the third item is management. And this is always a tricky one, because oftentimes when folks are talking about forest issues, they go back and they look at the Forest Service kind of 10 a.m. or 10 acre rule policy. And that's something that basically the Forest Service instituted, where they had a goal of not letting any fire exceed 10 acres. And in some ways that exacerbated that helped kind of create this understanding that fire is a bad thing. Fire, like any natural resource or like any natural phenomenon, is part of nature, and it has a role to play. Unfortunately, we didn't understand that back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and really, probably up into the last maybe 30, 40 years, that fire does have a role to play, and that those low intensity fires are actually beneficial to the forest. What we have now, these catastrophic fires, they're not natural. They're not healthy. They don't do a whole lot of good for anybody, whether it's human or ecosystems. When those natural fires burned, oftentimes they were burning through low density areas where they would mainly consume the undergrowth and clear that out and allow for new growth to come in. What we have now, in part because of fire suppression, and also one of the big things that I think it's important to mention is we don't really go in and harvest our forests like we initially intended. Right now you have, ironically, probably more trees per acre in the Western United States than you've ever had. The problem is those trees are all about this big. They're not, this big around. So they're not as resilient. And when they're choked in there, creates a couple problems. One, it's easier for the beetles that I mentioned earlier to hop from tree to tree. Two, it makes it more difficult for snowpack to actually make it down to the ground in the under canopy, so it can get absorbed into the ground or not melt as soon. And three, because those trees aren't able to grow out and be as big and as robust as they used to be, they're much more fragile. And so they're susceptible to poor health. And then when fires do inevitably come through, they're also more susceptible to burning up. So the management issue is one where I think we actually have, ironically, both the most control, but also some of the biggest challenges, because there's political issues that are involved there. And I'll talk a little bit about that in some of the current or upcoming slides. And this just kind of goes again to highlighting some of the issues that we're seeing in forests and really kind of looking back at last year. The National Interagency Fire Center reported that wildfires burned over 10.27 million acres as of December 31st, 2020. So at the end of last year. It's actually the highest total since the accurate records were kept in 1983. And the scary thing is the previous record was 10.13 million acres back in 2015. And so you might say, well, that's 2015 to 2020. That's not that big of a jump. I think the thing that's really interesting though is that when you break that number out, in 2015, over half of those wildfires were burning in Alaska. In relatively unpopulated areas. And obviously all those, climate conditions and the carbon that they were off-putting were issues there, but it's a different kind of issue. Whereas last year, over 98% of the acres that burned was in the continental kind of contiguous US, so shifting where those fires are burned. And not only was the total acreage burned last year historic, but the damages and costs were also near historic levels, over 16.5 billion, which is the third highest in costs on record, with 2017 and 2018 edging it out a little bit. As you guys know, last year Colorado saw 3 largest wildfires on record, and you guys weren't alone. In seeing some historic wildfires. In California, they had a 1.3 million August complex fire, which was the largest fire in the state on record for California. It's also the largest individual wildfire in the continental US since the Great Fire of 1910. So, which is a not so great thing. In addition, Washington State also had its largest fire on record last year. And if you go back just a couple of years, Montana and Idaho had their largest wildfires on record in 2019. So I'm not saying anything that folks aren't already familiar with, but we do continue to see not just the wildfire not just continue to be an issue, but a growing issue, and the severity of it continues to grow. So we've got some major challenges ahead of us. Now, there are numerous issues that can come out from wildfire. I'm just going to touch on just a couple of them. And these are pictures actually from one of our partners in Arizona, the Salt River Project. Obviously, when you have an initial fire, you have immediate concerns. Concerns about health, concerns about safety, concerns about protecting buildings, as well as concerns about your infrastructure, your facilities, and your staff that are right there. So in Oregon last year, they had a terrible wildfire season as well. You do have some immediate infrastructure impacts, and that can be if you're burning through an area where you have a HDPE pipe or something like that. Temperatures get high enough that it can melt that pipe. That's a major issue. We actually had one of our, and I should have put the video in here because it's pretty incredible. But one of our an irrigation district in Oregon, their office actually caught fire and burnt down, and there was a propane facility, charging facility kind of next to them that actually exploded. And they had on local news, somebody was driving by filming it. You see this giant explosion, and it took out a couple trucks and then their irrigation district office. So you've got those kinds of impacts. And then post-fire is where you often see some of the worst impacts to water supply. And usually it is due to post-fire flooding. One of the things that is, I think, really interesting about just how fire ecology works is oftentimes when you have a real high intensity fire come through an area, it does a couple things. Obviously, it burns things, takes your vegetation off. It can also alter the top. If it burns at a high enough intensity, it can alter the top part of your soil substrate and create what they call like a hydrophobic condition where water, that soil layer is so dense, it's hard for water to actually get in and sink down. So instead it runs off. So even if you have some vegetation there, it's still not enough to hold on to it. So you end up with these really bad flooding events. And that can create reservoir capacity loss, because all that water rushes down in the form of sediment, starts taking up reservoir capacity. That flooding can also damage infrastructure. It can rush through, if you're using if it gets into a canal and there's a flood event, it can cause a canal to blow out. And the flooding is really probably the most damaging part of costly and damaging part from a water supply perspective. The other issue is you have water quality degradation. So the three vials you can see there are some of the turbidity from the Verde River in Arizona, and this is after one of their fires. So you go from something that looks like your regular glass of water to two things that look like the blackest coffee I've ever seen at Dunkin' Donuts, and that's not good for anybody. It's obviously not good for people. You have to address those water quality issues before you can deliver that water, whether it's for drinking water purposes or for irrigation. It's also not good for species that rely on those rivers. That increased turbidity is terrible for species. So you have not only a human impact, you not only have an infrastructure and water supply impact, but you also have a species impact. And a few years ago, when the greater sage-grouse conversation was ongoing, one of the things that the Bureau of Land Management noted, because there's obviously a lot of issues surrounding ESA, and one of those is predation, and habitat is one. But another one, the BLM actually reported that the largest threat to sage-grouse was brush fire, wildfire. So, and that's not uncommon. In these Arizona fires here, there was some protected owl habitat that was destroyed. So there's not only a human impact, but there's definitely a species impact, which, as we get into some of the legislative history, gets a little bit more complex. So anytime you're trying to pass a bill in Congress, it's challenging. You're going to have different views on pretty much everything. It is. Right now, Congress is trying to debate an infrastructure package. I think that's something that everybody in the U.S. says, yes, we want infrastructure. We want our roads to work. We want our water supply to flow. And we don't want to fall off a bridge. But Congress still is when you get down into the details, you start having a more difficult time finding agreement. And so they're currently debating that. And that's a kind of a no-brainer issue that's become very contentious. Well, forest health, I feel like, should be another no-brainer issue, because everybody, I don't know anybody that doesn't want to have a healthy forest. I don't know anybody that doesn't want to have a healthy watershed, but how you get there is where it becomes complicated. We've had some recent legislation that has helped, I think, but like many problems, there's not one solution. There's a number of different things you have to do. So I think probably the most transformative of these bills, in part because it started the conversation, started in Western Colorado with, I think, a former Club 20 member, Congressman Scott McGinnis, actually. He was the lead architect of the Healthy Forest Restoration Act back in the early 2000s. It provided some new tools, including NEPA, some funding resources, ideas surrounding community wildfire protection plans, and some good neighbor authorities. Next, just a couple of years ago, again, with a lot of help from Colorado, Senator Cory Gardner and Michael Bennet pushing on this, but FY28 Omnibus Appropriations Bill put an end to fire borrowing, where the Forest Service was taking at one point over half of their budget and dedicating it to wildfire response, which is kind of, we spend billions and billions of dollars every year fighting fires, but it is like pulling teeth to get any money invested on the front end to correct the conditions that would actually prevent those fires. So the end of the fire borrowing authority was definitely a good step because it removed Forest Service cannibalizing other programs to try to fight fires, with part of the goal being maybe they could put a little bit more of that budget into pre-fire mitigation. And then the 2018 Farm Bill thanks to Senator Bennett, there was some additional language in there, expanding categorical exclusions. There was also a new watershed management program that was put in place. So all good provisions, none of them silver bullet. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And there are a couple different bills that are out there right now, kind of a bit of a legislative outlook. So the Americans Jobs Plan is obviously what the Biden administration has announced as part of its infrastructure proposal. One element of that talked about investing $50 billion in infrastructure investments. And there was a relatively broad, the total plan was over $2 trillion, but there was a section in there talking about some Western issues. And it referenced $50 billion for a broad range of things, including wildfire and drought mitigation. It did include by name a reference to Senator Bennett's Outdoor Restoration Act, which is a good bill. Again, it's not a one size fits all fix, but it's a step in the right direction. And Senator Bennett has also introduced that as a standalone bill, and Congressman Crow is the House sponsor. Just yesterday, Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced the Wildfire Emergency Act. Similar to the Outdoor Restoration Act, it's not going to fix everything, but it is another, I think, step in the right direction. The bill specifically references water infrastructure and creating some authorities to carve out, corridors to protect certain critical infrastructure, including some types of water infrastructure. And then this is a bill from the last Congress, actually. This is the Resilient Federal Forests Act, which was introduced by Congressman Bruce Westerman of Arkansas. Congressman Westerman is actually a really interesting guy. He is the ranking member of the House Resources Committee, which means he's the lead Republican over there. And even though he's not a Westerner, he is uniquely positioned to understand natural resource issues and especially forestry, because he is a graduate of the Yale School of Forestry and has worked as a forester. So he's got a very unique perspective and understanding of forestry issues. All of these bills, I think, have good components. I think that Congressman Westerman's is probably the most comprehensive, but that also makes it probably the most controversial, because at the end of the day, one of the things you have to do is cut trees. And whether you're, Republican, Democrat, environmentalist, or, industry, there's differences of opinion on what the best way to do that is. Ultimately, I don't think anybody views, with rare exception, clear cutting being the right solution. I think that it's a healthy forest management effort to get the tree stands back to where they used to be, kind of historically, where you actually you don't maybe have the postcard picturesque dense green forest. You have a patchy forest with 19, 20, maybe 100 trees per acre instead of 200, 300, in some cases 1,000 trees per acre. You have areas where the wildfire can get down and the undergrowth and burn through and leave the majority of the forest standing and healthy. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done on the legislative side this year. As Congress is debating infrastructure, we are, NWRA and some of the other groups that we work with, we are trying to get some forest health legislation included in that discussion, whether it's funding for Forest Service to do treatments, or if it's more of on the authorities side.
Hey, Ian, Cindy Dozier put in the chat, she said, which water infrastructure does the Feinstein bill carve out? Does it contemplate the issue of water sources needing protection?
That's actually a great question. So the Feinstein bill doesn't specifically reference source water. It more talks to infrastructure utility type facilities. So like a pipeline, a pump station, a canal, something like that. The Forest Service, though, in the last Farm Bill, did create a new source water protection program, which is, there are some elements of it that are forest health related. It's not solely related to forest health, but it can be used for funding in that area. So I don't know if that helps. There are a couple of other examples that I can point to as well. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you, Gary. Yeah, Gary mentioned that clear cutting is required for species like aspen and lodgepole pine. So yeah, I'll defer to you guys on that. I am not a forester by trade, so I think there are definitely some instances where clear cutting can be used. I think that in kind of the policy discussion, when we're talking about forest health, it's important to kind of draw those lines about where it's where it makes sense, I guess. Bit of clarification: patchy forests, areas of clear cut fire breaks, or clearing undergrowth or something else. So when I say patchy forests, I should probably say what I'm referencing is more kind of the historical forest ecosystem structure, where you have a combination of trees and open land. I'm not sure if that helps, but there's some historic photos of kind of the Buffalo Creek area that Denver Water has from back right after, I think it was right after the Buffalo Creek fire. You could tell the difference between stand density 100 years ago, where you have maybe 40 trees per acre, and stand density now where you've probably got hundreds of trees per acre. So. Mr. Treese.
Mr. Lyle, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. You looking good, buddy?
Doing well.
Hey, the Westerman bill. I'm familiar with it, and I remember it well. It was a topic when I was testifying for NWRA before the Senate Ag Committee. I was asked specifically about the Westerman bill, and the Westerman bill didn't have sufficient traction when Westerman was in the majority and the Senate was Republican controlled. Now that neither Senate or House are in Republican hands, what prospects does the Westerman bill have this Congress? If Club 20 is going to put its efforts behind legislation, is it the Westerman bill or something else?
Oh, it's a great question, Chris, and it highlights kind of the political dynamic and weighing out how to look at some of these proposals. So right now, the Westerman bill has not been reintroduced. I know that his team is talking with folks in the Senate about pulling out some of the provisions that are in it, and trying to find a home for those, possibly in an infrastructure package. My understanding is that there's actually a discussion ongoing at the Senate Energy Committee as well, within the minority members, about putting together a forest proposal as well. So there's a chance that some of those provisions could end up in other vehicles. Right now, I don't think Club 20 needs to weigh in on the Westerman proposal, since it hasn't officially been reintroduced. I would encourage you guys to take a look at Senator Bennett and Congressman Crow's bill, to see if there are ways that areas that you would support, areas you think could be tweaked. There's, like I said, there's some good things in there. And NWRA is in the process of developing a letter of support for that bill. We think that there's some other opportunities to get some other things done, though, outside of where the Bennett bill focuses. So I think it's going to be a many hands, multi-bill approach likely. And, we're already starting to look towards, there's probably 3 different options for forest health legislation this year. And I want to be kind of cognizant of the clock. So Christian, let me know if I need to zip it. But one is going to be standalone, which is probably the most challenging. And then there is going to be a push to include some type of forest health language in an infrastructure package. Not sure, just because the broader fate of the infrastructure package is not clear right now. And and this is where it gets a little nerdy. So if they go the budget reconciliation route in the Senate, they only need 51 votes to pass something out. They don't need to kind of compromise. but that also excludes a lot of policy. Really, you can only do things that are finance or budget related. So there's a couple things in Forest Health that you could put in there for funding, but it limits what you can do kind of on the authorities side. So.
Thanks, Ian. That's really
Sure,
helpful.
Chris. Thank you.
Keep us in mind when, as strategies coalesce.
Yeah, we'll do. Well, and just kind of talking about strategies and things you guys can do. And this is not specific to Forest Health per se. I'm not asking you guys right now to endorse anything, but we'll definitely reach out when we see bills that we think would be of interest to Club 20. But just wanted to encourage you guys to get out there and do what you would be doing if you were in DC normally this time of year, which is talking to your members of Congress. You know, DC is kind of a weird place right now. Although I believe on June 11th, last Friday, we opened our restaurants fully. June 11th, sporting events can reopen. So I bought my first baseball tickets of in 2 years yesterday. So excited for that. But Congress is still in this weird kind of state where they're doing things. It's actually a very busy time right now. But they're not holding in-person meetings in DC. So most hearings will have a couple members of Congress, maybe a witness or two there, but then everybody else is remote. My dog is letting me know the postman is here. So, but
Is that the new one?
no, that's our 13-year-old. So the new one will probably join in a moment. So, but just make sure that you guys are taking this opportunity to talk to your members of Congress. Just because you can't meet with them out here doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reaching out to them. I've been frankly very pleased with how responsive staff has been. And you guys are uniquely positioned because as they're traveling back in the state, you probably have a better opportunity to meet with them than if you were coming out here to DC just because of COVID and then, some of the other security issues at the Capitol. So definitely, reach out to your members, regardless of your political party. It's always good and always important for them to hear from you. So.
Awesome. And I think we had one more question in the chat that I think we didn't get to from Paula Stepp. She said, to balance the need to cut trees, are there plans for restoration for the large amounts of acreage that have burned in the last few years? With the Grizzly Fire, it's difficult to replant on the steep canyons because that's Glenwood Canyon. But there are other burn areas with opportunity for new growth. What plans are in place for setting up nurseries to prepare for that restoration?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great question. I do think nurseries have a role to play there. There's a couple different proposals that have been floated. There's one that's called the Trillion Trees Initiative, which I believe would make funding available for reforestation. I think that the Biden administration has mentioned that as well. So I do think that there is a chance that funding will be available. We work with some nurseries up in Oregon, and there's a kind of an infrastructure coalition that we're on the steering committee of, and there are some nurseries that are involved there in looking at trying to get funding for reforestation, because that's one of the biggest issues is post-fire. Doing that post-fire rehabilitation and obviously getting vegetation on the ground is one of the best ways to prevent all that sedimentation that we were worried about. So.
Excellent. Well, Ian, thank you so much. So happy to see you via Zoom, and hopefully your travels find themselves in Colorado soon, maybe at Water Congress or something like that. So
yeah. Well,
should you
guys
be in the state, let us know.
Will do.
There's an all-star game in Colorado this year.
That's true. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you again, Christian and Chris and Nancy and Ray and everybody. Really good to see you all. Thanks for what you're doing, and take care.
Thanks, Ian. You too.
Thank you.
So we will now jump into a brief virtual networking opportunity. We want to take a moment to thank our title sponsor for today's event, Chevron. So now I will go ahead and open up our networking rooms. We will resume our meeting at 10:15 with an update on business issues. I hope you enjoyed a few minutes anyways to visit with one another. We don't get to do that all that often these days. So I'm extremely excited to introduce to you our next presenter, another friend of Club 20. Tony Gagliardi has served as the Colorado State Director of the National Federation of Independent Businesses since 2005 and brings a wealth of experience to the position, having a background in government relations, consulting, and lobbying. Tony is joining us this morning to give us an update on current issues facing the business community, which I know are numerous, unfortunately. So Tony, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You are still muted. There you go. Hi,
There we
Tony.
go. It's technology and I, you know, I'm still fascinated that my car starts with the push of a button. So shows you where I am. Thanks so much for the invitation to join you all. I have a very special place in my heart for Grand Junction and the Western Slope, and more than honored to join you today. Like Kristen said, a lot going on in DC, and to be right up front with you, I don't normally do federal updates. I leave that to our professionals in DC. But they provided me with some slides and some material. So hopefully I don't bore you and we can get through this. So first of all, there's some key dates, and I'm going to try to get to my slides. And Kristen, what do I need to do to share this with you?
So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a button that's illuminated in green that says share screen.
Okay, I did see that, and I'm trying to get to it here.
If you click that, a window will pop up with all of the files you have open.
Okay.
So pick the one you want to share.
And I think this is it right here. And then okay, there we go.
Perfect.
These are just some of the key dates that, and as you notice, the very first one we've already gone past, and I have not gotten word back what came out of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee yesterday on the, it's supposed to be a bipartisan bill, the transportation bill, and then moving forward with the highway bill. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, they continue to push this hearing forward. Right now, the last word I got was they're going to try to push at least some highway funding through by July 4th. It'll be Speaker Pelosi's goal to have that done. But it will be only surface transportation and highways and not for the tax component. So let's see here. Okay, now I'm trying to change slides here. There we go. The American Rescue Plan, how that works and how that intersected with small businesses. There are parts that we did get a win on. And the first, if you notice the policy, it's a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill, $350 billion to state and local government funding. And naturally, our state has fallen all over themselves to figure how to spend that. And the win for small business was, first of all, the parliamentarian had disallowed the $15 minimum wage to be included. Senator Sanders was able to force a vote to include the $15 minimum wage. We key voted, and that's how we, at the end of the congressional session, we will compile our voting record that goes out to our membership to let them know how their congressional delegation voted. So we did key vote that against the amendment. and 8 Democrats joined with 50 Republicans to oppose it. So it was a significant loss for Senator Sanders. The American Jobs Plan, taxes and infrastructure, $2.3 trillion in physical and care infrastructure. Corporate C Corps increase in tax rate from 21 to 28% is proposed. NFIB is very concerned, as all small business and in fact all business owners and organizations should be, regarding the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize. It prohibits state right to work laws, which really does not come into play for Colorado, but it's unknown whether we could see any action against our Labor Protection Act, the Labor Peace Agreement that we have. That, in essence, has always kept Colorado from becoming a right to work state, because we've been able to maintain that balance with the Labor Peace Act. So the future of it, I don't know yet. Removes the secret ballot provision for union organizing. And many of you might remember back in the, I believe it was the first Obama administration, the card check effort by the unions. Rather than have a secret ballot, they could have a union organizing election simply by workers checking yes or no on a card. This one goes even further. It would require that employers disclose contact information of the employees during a union organizing attempt. Brings back, or not to skip over something that's very important, it allows for secondary boycotts. So in other words, if a company has an organizing effort moving forward, union workers or representatives could actually put up picket lines and start picketing subsidiaries or vendors that they may do business with. So, and then restores the joint employer effort. Basically, what the attempt has always been is to pierce the corporate veil, being able to, for example, if I work for McDonald's here not too far from me, and I decide that I'm being harassed or it's not a safe workplace, and I file a suit. Well, not only am I allowed to file suit against the franchise owner of that McDonald's, but it would all go all the way up the chain to McDonald's Corporation, holds everybody jointly responsible. And then it expands the California's ABC test for independent contractors. In other words, would pretty much prohibit independent contractors. And many times as a small business owner, this is exactly how we feel. You know, I think it was Ronald Reagan, God rest his soul, who said the worst thing someone could hear is we're from the government and we're here to help you. So moving on, the American Jobs Plan and how that affects small C corporations. You see it pre-2018, this was the taxable income and the associated corporate tax rate. From 2018 to the present, goes to, went up to 21% corporate rate, and then the president's proposal now is for a flat 28% corporate rate. 63% of C Corps have less than $400,000 in business receipts. The president's job proposal increased the corporate tax rate on C Corps by 33% and increased the, trying to get to my notes here, increase the corporate tax rate on the smallest C corporations. And I can't see that number because the bar is on top of it here. But anyway, it increases that by equivalent of 87% for small C corporations. So what's interesting though, raising the corporate rate on small C corps is going to do very little to raise additional tax revenue for the federal government. Real world effect. This is Mr. McBride, owner of business down in Mumford, Alabama. And you can read that. And what I'm going to do, because I'm going to be moving fairly quickly over a few slides, because I do want to save time for questions for you all. If you all want a copy of my slides, I'll make them available to Christian, and she can just distribute them. American Families Plan Taxes and Human Infrastructure. I never heard the term human infrastructure until this new administration got in place. Tax increases individual and family-owned business taxes, creates new taxes at death, increases the top marginal tax rate from 37 to 39.6%, lowers thresholds, broadens bases. The labor mandates that are included in this proposal mandates employer paid sick leave. Again, in Colorado, we are already under a mandatory paid sick leave program. And in fact, January 2022, it applies whether you even have just one employee. Right now, we're still under a 10 or fewer exemption, but January 1 of 2022, we do go to one employee or more. Creates government paid family and medical leave. We already had one thanks to Proposition 118, and proposes on employment insurance stabilizer, which I wish I could go into detail exactly what an unemployment insurance stabilizer is, but that is not in my wheelhouse. So I will leave that to the experts. The American Families Plan versus the family business, the new taxes I mentioned. Capital gains currently are measured on an asset's value over time. Top capital gains rate is 20% plus 3.8 net investment income tax. Proposed policy would align the top capital gains rate to 39.6% plus the 3.8 net investment income tax for a total of 43.4%. Currently, when an asset is sold, it's taxed. Farmland value appreciates over several years, and you pay capital gains tax when sold. Under the proposal, it's taxed when an asset is sold and or when a family member dies. So that could cripple the family farms in being able to pass them on intact. Also brings into play if business owners, especially small business owners, have not given any consideration to succession of the business. What are your wishes for that business? Should you depart, or should you decide to sell or turn it over, retire? It is time for some planning, just thinking ahead on how you would handle a change in ownership. We move on. Also, the new provision also talks about a stepped up basis. You're starting to hear a lot about this. I know I've been getting phone calls from lobbying groups across the country wanting to know what we're doing about it. And I know our DC office is very busy with this issue. And moving on, the real world effects. Here is another short statement from a business owner in Portland, Oregon. You have all these ups and downs as a business owner. Everybody can relate to that. And the payoff at the end, your exit strategy is when you go to finally retire and pass it on or sell it to somebody else. By having the additional death taxes or capital gains, you take away all that sorry about that. Looks somebody got a couple too many words in there. But anyway, it destroys being able, and it destroys the valuation when you go to pass that business on. Income taxes, again, from the American Family Plan and versus family business, we talked about the 37% current marginal tax rate. The proposed goes up to 39.6. Taxable income is at $452,700 for a single and $509,300 joint. Marriage penalty, 2 married individuals with income exceeding $255,000 each would be taxed at 39.6%, a 3.8% Medicare surtax applied to active income, and increase IRS enforcement and reporting. And speaking of the IRS, got that little gem.
That's pretty funny, Tony.
Yeah, the only thing, it's funny to us, but through experience, I find that most IRS employees I've come in contact with over the years, there's an old saying, being toilet trained at gunpoint, and there's no sense of humor at all at the IRS. So here's another true life story from another business owner in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I'm not going to spend time on reading. Again, this one really kind of hits home. It would be far easier to reform the death tax laws than our tax policy. Last I heard, it was something like increasing, we're over 22,000 pages, somewhere in that effect, of tax policy at the federal level, and between rules and regulations. And so we are, NFIB is busy on these. We have come out with a small business survival campaign. It's available on our website to fill you in on what it does. We're ramping up our grassroots efforts in the states, in the state government relations programs. Our research center, we have one of the deepest and most utilized research centers of any organization of our kind in the United States. Our reports are used by everybody from the Federal Reserve to congressional budget offices, and then our on the Hill and in the state lobbying efforts. Talking about our congressional members, this is how so far our 2 senators have voted regarding Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett. Senator Hickenlooper, as you know, sits on the Small Business Committee. Senator Bennett sits on the Senate Finance Committee. The legislation preventing tax increases during the pandemic, both of them voted with NFIB. The $15 minimum wage amendment, they voted against us. And the unemployment insurance reduction, they voted against us. They did vote with us on the PPP extension. And at the end of this congressional the entire congressional session, as I said, we will be releasing our report we do, how Congress voted, and by state it's broken down with the entire delegation and how they voted with NFIB. And a couple things I want to make you all aware of. This is available to members and non-members. You're more than helpful. We're going to have, usually these fly-ins are done in person. And Christian, I know you've done your fly-ins, and unfortunately we haven't been able to have an in-person fly-in for a while. This one's going to be virtual. We're hoping next year, this is the last one we do on a virtual basis. But this one will include legislative issues briefing with our federal staff and some of the state staff. There will be member exclusive policy sessions with federal policymakers and special guests, and then everybody's welcome to the insiders political briefings and a lot more. But this is available to non-members as well as members. And if you see in the corner there, all you have to do is go to flyin@nfib.org. Registration should be open by this weekend. And with that, I wanted to bring my tune up the banjo so I could put all this stuff to 4-part harmony, but I didn't think I'd have enough time. So still have a little bit of time for questions. I'm happy to answer anything.
If you have questions for Tony, please type them into the chat or use the raise your hand feature. Tony, I wanted to ask you just a little more generally, what are you hearing from the Colorado business community as to what they're struggling with in terms of rebounding from the pandemic?
Well, and that's a great question, Christian. I get asked that a lot, when I'm hearing from our members and hearing from small business owners in general. They are doing everything they can. And I don't care if it's restaurants, if it's manufacturing, if it's the local shoe shop on Main Street. It doesn't matter. They're doing everything they can to get their employees back to work. That's the first obstacle. That's why we're very interested in what Governor Polis has proposed with the $1,600 return to work incentive. Because I talked to several I talked to my barber a few months ago when he was trying to get opened up again. And I asked him, I said, I'm either going to, you're either going to have to open up or I'm going to have to get a rabies shot, one of the two, because my hair is getting so long. And he shared that he can't get his people back to work because of that extra unemployment payment. Well, I think the incentive is a good step in the right direction. I hope it works, but everything else, if you look at not only from the federal level, but let's bring it back down to the state level. We've got the legislature. Just before I got on this call, the Senate had just passed Senate Bill 176 on third reading. Bills like that, the public option healthcare bill, the workers' comp, any willing provider, all that's going to do is raise costs. Those bills are going to do nothing but raise costs on employers, expose them to legal risk now. And we got to be leaving businesses alone. Let them do what they do best. That's operate their business and create new jobs. And the higher the costs go on businesses, that's less money they have to reinvest and expand, and again, to create new jobs.
Definitely. I find myself concerned over some of the proposed rules around C Corps because my family's business is a C Corp.
Sure.
And they're lucky to make 20 grand at the end of the year, right? But moving from, a 15% tax rate to a 28% tax rate is going to have pretty significant impacts to their bottom line. So,
absolutely. And NFIB, when the Trump administration took over and came out with their first stimulus plan, aimed at getting business up and running, we had to come out and oppose it and sit across the table in the White House and say, I'm sorry, we cannot agree to this because it was going to do nothing for small businesses and everything for huge businesses. And then we were able to get the 20% pass-through deduction. And we're going to fight hard and fast to always maintain that. And we've had to do it, we had to do it during the special session last year here to keep that 20% pass-through. They wanted, our legislature wanted us to add that back in before you filed your state taxes. And we're just going to fight like the Dickens to hang on to that.
Well, thank you for doing that. I know it would make a difference for my family's business. Ray, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Christian. Thank you, Tony. It's nice to have you on board this
Thank
morning.
you.
Great presentation. So it's very obvious with the death tax, they're gonna get in our pockets and won't even allow us to die in peace. So that's just a comment. But in terms of your comment, in terms of raising taxes for businesses and stuff like that, they don't realize that this is going to have a domino effect within all of our communities throughout the United States, meaning that, do you know how many 501c3 organizations are in each community, which are the lifeblood of our communities, things that they do that they don't get a whole lot of recognition
Exactly.
for? And they come to small businesses to ask for donations. And now they're even going to have to pull back on that, which is going to hurt our 501c3 businesses within each community. I think that's just, they get hammered already, and they try to support our communities. And then when you add additional taxes to what they're already doing, it's absurd. It really is.
I really do appreciate your comment. And it's one that I hold dear to my heart, is in committee hearings. I often have to remind policymakers that the first people that the community, the 501c3s come to are small business owners. When they need a new ball field, when they need a new woman's shelter, it's small businesses who step up to the plate and help the community. The small businesses are the community, and you keep putting pressure on them, whether it's higher taxes, more regulation, more risk of legal action for something that may not even be their fault. They're going to pull back. They're going to pull back. They're going to have to. So I really do appreciate your comment.
Well, and Club 20 is a 501c6, which isn't all that much different from a 501c3.
That's right.
So we'll definitely have some challenges as well. Merritt?
Thank you, Tony. Great presentation, very interesting. So, and I echo what was said about the 501c3s. We have it, and I'm in Grand County, and as you know, we had the second biggest fire in Colorado history here. And our local foundation raised almost $4 million in a matter of months, and all that comes from, exactly like you say, from small businesses and individuals, and it's helping for the fire recovery and cleanup and all those things. It's great. But my question really, and it's kind of way out there, philosophical, all these tax increases and all these things that you deal with every day, what is the really ultimate goal with all this stuff? What are we really shooting for? I know that's a really big picture, way out there question, but what do you think we're really after with all these things?
Boy, you know what, Merritt, if I had an answer to that, I don't know if I'd be sitting here. It's hard. Christian probably will attest to this. When you're down in that Capitol, and you listen to some of these committee hearings and some of these policies being put forth, you ask yourself, what are they thinking? What is the ultimate goal here? And I'm going to use House Bill 1232 as an example, this public option health bill. We've had, I think, 2 strike below amendments. It's on its way. back to the House for concurrence with the amendments in that. But if one reads that, the most powerful person in state government is going to end up being the insurance commissioner. If you read that bill, we make him, he already has the authority to, he's the only one with the authority to approve or disapprove rate changes for health insurance, and in the individual and small group markets. There's public records showing that he has turned down rate decreases before and only allowed a small rate decrease because we believe it's to hide the fact that health insurance are doing everything they can to lower costs. They're trying to keep the costs down, but they lose the fact that we got to talk about the cost of treatment too. But that's a conversation for another time. But it really is, it's getting to be, we just shake our heads sometimes and say, what were you thinking?
Well, and especially since insurers have to put, I think it's 82% of all the premiums they receive back into
That's right.
Health service, and the public option bill as it currently stands requires that insurers reduce their premiums by 18% by 2025. I guess I'm a little perplexed as to how that pencils out.
Yeah. And when you have the commissioner who has the authority to say, you know, I'm not going to take this rate decrease. I'm only going to allow you this amount.
Right.
And I think it's a conflict of interest personally for the insurance commissioner's office.
Yep, definitely. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us for this virtual fly-in. And if there's anything we can do to help be supportive to your efforts at the state level or the federal level, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I look so forward to getting over and seeing you all in your neck of the woods.
Yes, let us know when you're headed over the hill.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, our next speaker is also someone who is familiar with Club 20 and has met with our organization in person in Washington, D.C. every time that we have requested a meeting. As Deputy Director for Operations, Mike Ned oversees the BLM's daily activities and initiatives and more than 9,000 employees located mostly in the Western United States. Prior to being named Deputy Director in February of 2019, he was Assistant Director for Energy, Minerals, Realty Management, and led the BLM's Renewable Energy, Fluid, and Solid Minerals, Land and Realty survey programs. So lots of experience joining us here today. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and please take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you see me okay?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Christine, and really appreciate you and Club 20 inviting me to come and visit with you. Nada sent her regards. She certainly wanted to be here. And as you can imagine, trying to, every day Nada and I, or periodically we sit and say, you take this, you take this, you take this. She said, Mike, you've been with them before. How about taking that? I said, no problem. Well, again, thank you for having me here. As certainly the BLM, we are glad to be with you as we celebrate our 75th birthday as an agency and continuing our discussion with you. We know that members community are close to the public lands, and we're always happy to hear from you about issues relating to health and productive landscape, including both how we develop the resources on the land, whether it's renewable or fossil energy, whether it's other areas such as recreation, grazing, and other things that is matter to the local community in the Western land slope. Before going into the topic though, I wanted to just say briefly, we celebrated our 75th anniversary in 1946. The General Land Office merged with the Grazing Service to form what is now the BLM. our story began with what we call under the reorganization plan number 3, the Act of 1946. And this administrative action of 46 set in motion what we saw was the hard work by real people underground who turned public policy into reality. From the Arctic Ocean to the border with New Mexico, from the Key West, Florida, the San Juan Islands of Washington State, we have seen work that creates a living anthropology of our relationship with the public land and with the public. This year, we celebrate this rich history and how we helped to shape this country. And we looked at the legacy as the largest federal land manager in the nation, I like to say in the world. We head into the next 75 years, we're challenged to reimagine our public lands with the nearly 245 million acres of possibility it holds. We know the public lands are important to so many people in this country for a multitude of reasons, as I said, for recreation, conservation, wildlife habitat, and the list goes on and on. As we talk and look at the current administration, the Biden administration priority that includes climate change, and we're addressing the issues and uses, we have to ask, we as humans, how do we use resources? Looking at climate change will help to define the future for years to come. Americans are accustomed to using these lands for various recreational, commercial, and conservation activities, and we need to keep it that way. We are already witnessing a rapidly changing climate that has amplified drought and wildfires, exacerbate invasive weeds, increase the frequency of intensity of extreme weather, even such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. Facing such large-scale challenges and with limited resources at our disposal, we certainly want to look at the possibility of how we rise to and adapt and overcome these side effects and to hand off the planet to our descendants in at least as good as it was when we inherited or better. As I'm sure you're aware, the administration recognized the threat of climate change as one of the defining crises of our time and prioritizing conservation as a means towards mitigating its worst impact. President Biden set ambitious goals that will ensure America and the world can meet the urgent demands of the climate crisis while enabling American workers and businesses to lead a clean energy revolution that achieves a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035 and put the United States on an irreversible path to a net zero economy by 2050. Under the Biden administration, we recognize the BLM important role. Of course, the BLM, we believe, is well suited with its strong record on renewable energy and conservation backed by the deep knowledge and expertise of its land manager. In addition, BLM is committed to putting a new generation of Americans to work, conserving and restoring public lands and water through the Civilian Climate Corps. The Corps will make a significant impact by increasing reforestation, increasing carbon sequestration in the agricultural sector, providing biodiversity activities, improving access to recreation, and addressing changing climate. Everyone, whether in the Western Slopes or various other rural, urban, or tribal community, is affected by the heavy burden that accompany extreme storms, wildfire, drought, and floods. And so we, BLM, are fortunate to have a role in this and looking forward to our continued work. The administration recognized and acknowledged that the impact of fossil fuel development is an important part of the climate change discussion. According to the US Geological Survey, fossil fuel extraction on public land account for nearly a quarter of all US greenhouse gases emission. To gain a better understanding of how the BLM federal oil and gas program can better serve the public, in March, the department held a public forum in which panel members received expert testimony and engaged in a substantive dialogue with subject matter experts, community members, local and state leaders, tribal leaders, members of Congress, and a whole host of other stakeholders. The department commissioned a comprehensive review of the leasing and permitting program and continue to gather public input on how to improve this program. As part of the Interior Department's ongoing review of the federal oil and gas program, as directed by Executive Order 14008, the Bureau of Land Management is exercising its discretion to not hold lease sale in the second quarter of this calendar year, 2021. This decision does not impact existing operation or permits for valid and existing lease, which continue to be reviewed and approved. The BLM remain committed to managing our program in a way that restore balance on public land, create jobs, and provide a path to align the management of the American public lands with our nation's climate conservation and clean energy priority. The ongoing review mandated by Executive 1408 is assessing, among other things, whether the current leasing process provide taxpayer with a fair return for the extraction of the nation's oil and gas resources, how to ensure it complies with applicable law, such as the National Environment Policy Act and the United States Trust Responsibility, and how it will take into account climate change and environmental justice. As you know, in addition to fossil fuel, we promote energy development on public land in all forms, including solar, wind, and geothermal. The Energy Act of 2020 also directs us to improve interagency federal permitting coordination for solar, wind, and geothermal permitting on federal land. It sets new goal for renewable energy, the production on federal land, and issue permit that authorize production at least 25 gigawatt of electricity by 2025. EO Executive Order 14008 also directs us to review siting and permitting process on public land, and not only on public land, but in offshore waters to identify steps to increase renewable energy production. This ambitious effort directed by President Biden includes renewable energy goals that will create jobs to support families, boost local economy, and help address economic injustice. Overall, the department will oversee the BLM. The department that oversees the BLM has partnered with other federal agencies to increase renewable energy production on public land. Great America Outdoors Act. Over the course of the fiscal year 2021, at least $6 million have been allocated to BLM Colorado for providing, through the Great American Outdoor Act, projects, including deferred maintenance to roads, facilities, improvements at the canyons of the ancient national monument, radio tower repair, and well repair. Many of these projects will require work from contractors and the local community. As you may be aware, through executive action, the president has committed the United States to a 30 by 30 goal. This is, of course, conservation at least 30% of our land and water by 2030. By some estimate, we currently have 12% of our land in the United States protected in line with the 30 by 30 goal. This means to meet the goal, we have to protect another 18%, or about 400 million acres, which is an area about twice the size of Texas. As we know, this is no small task. To meet this momentum, or to meet this moment, the Biden-Harris administration has launched America the Beautiful, a decade-long challenge to pursue a locally led and volunteers nationwide effort to conserve, connect, and restore the land, water, and wildlife upon which we all depend. This conservation effort is recommended by scientists in order to safeguard every community's health, food supply, biodiversity, and prosperity. Conserving lands and water will slow extinction rate and help leverage natural climate solution to combat climate change. The Department of Interior has partnered with the Department of Agriculture and Commerce, National Ocean and Atmosphere Administration, and the White House Council on Environmental Quality to develop initial recommendation on how to advance an inclusive and collaborative conservation. We issued a report on May 6th. The report looks at addressing three key issues: natural loss, climate change, disparities in access to nature. This is broader than the approach used in other countries, focus on conservation and restoration with a flexible definition of conservation as opposed to looking only at the preservation or protection. It sets 8 core principles, including honoring tribal sovereignty, building on existing tools and strategy, not just new shiny ideas, supporting local led effort, honoring volunteer conservation and stewardship, pursuing approaches that create jobs. There are 6 focus areas of effort here, including creating more parks and safe outdoor opportunities in natural deprived communities, supporting tribal-led conservation and restoration priorities, expanding collaborative conservation of fish and wildlife habitat and corridors, increasing access for outdoor recreation, and of course, looking at ways to help take advantage of the Farm Bill program for conservation on working land, creating jobs by investing in restoration and resiliency, measuring and reporting baseline of what is conserved versus restored, and of course, working with partners. We believe in the BLM, working with partners is intimately intertwined with our work in conserving the American land. We are involved with industry, academia, non-government organization, communities, and other community groups like yourself, state and tribal, local government. At the heart of all of our 10,000 BLM employees who work, they value public involvement. While it is difficult to please everyone, we are happy and love to lift the hood to show people that we care about them. We care with talking, we care with understanding, we care with engaging. As you know, the Interior Department is carefully reviewing its BLM headquarters move from Washington, D.C. to Grand Junction. We're supporting the review and look forward to a deliberate and thoughtful process. Right now, the Interior leadership is working with BLM career staff to understand the ramification of the headquarters move and determine if any adjustment is needed. The BLM recognizes its importance of its historical role in overseeing culturally important land and its commitment to working with diverse stakeholders to properly manage cultural resources and support neighborhood communities, whether through energy policy, conservation projects, or restoring balance to public land. We, the BLM, enjoy and really depend upon public partners to carry out our work. This commitment represents a key tangible effort towards expanding conservation in line with the science to address climate change and to protect all species that depend upon a functioning ecosystem. We believe in meaningful engagement with diverse partners. At the end of the day, public lands belong to every American, and the BLM will continue its proud stewardship of those lands on behalf of the American people. Again, thank you for having me, and I look.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ned, for those remarks. Ziska, I may call on you to ask this question if it needs clarification, but one of our members asked, does a voluntary suspension of auctions mean no bidding on oil and gas leases? And if so, is it for any specified length of time? And you are muted, sir.
My goodness, I didn't know I muted. Well, again, you know, the Biden administration has asked for a review. And so right now on new lease sale, we've canceled all of those for the second quarter. We're waiting to see how we will approach the third quarter. So no new lease sale. However, for previous sale, as you know, those lands that did not receive a bid in an auction sits on the counter and is available for 2 years. So there's nothing stopping a proponent or an operator from going into any BLM land to look at the lands that is available, and they can still bid on those right now. But yeah, no new leases right now, at least in the quarter.
Thank you for that response. She also added, I'd like to congratulate the BLM on their film monitor program in Moab.
Yeah, well, we'll take it, and I will report that back to them.
Please, if you have questions for Mr. Ned, use the raise your hand feature or type into the chat box, and I'll make sure we get your question asked. So, Mr. Ned, I have personally seen you walking down Horizon Drive here in Grand Junction. I did a double take because I wasn't expecting to see you. And I whacked my husband and I was like, I know him.
Well, thank you for that. I'm still getting adjusted to Grand Junction, the valley. Of course, I love the weather compared to Denver when I was there in the 90s, and it's a very good place to be. I miss when I was there previously before the pandemic. I miss going to the restaurants and getting out. And during the pandemic, as we all know, it seems it was a little harder, but looking to returning to normalcy, whatever that may be defined as.
Well, and as you probably experienced firsthand, as people were locked up in the pandemic, they enjoyed our public lands to an extreme extent, to the point that I'm seeing now we've had to shut down a few locations to try to do some restoration and some trash pickup, unfortunately, and those sorts of activities. So
Absolutely. And let me put a pin on that. You're right. During the pandemic, we saw a lot more use of the public land. And what we're proud of is that, for the most part, in very few instances, people obey the rules, people listen. And so, again, we believe in America enjoying her public lands, and was glad to be a part of that.
our board chair, Merritt Linky, has his hand raised. Merritt, did you want to ask a question?
I do. Thank you. And thank you, Mike, for being on the call. Really appreciate your comments. Great to see. I didn't see you, but reporting that you're in Grand Junction, that's always good to know. So a lot of the counties in the Club 20 region have very serious concerns about the 30 by 30 proposal and what that all entails in terms of how that might lead to management or lack of management in terms of forest health on BLM lands, and what that means if that's going to involve takings from private land ownership and all those details of that. Can you address some of those concerns? A lot of our counties really are seriously and actually have passed resolutions against that. Can you talk about that?
Well, as you know, the broad priority areas, as I said, the president has laid out, and really the Biden-Harris administration is looking, how can we engage partnership so we have a shared vision for the conservation of land. I have heard no talk about takings. I have heard no talks about lockdown, but I imagine it will have to change our behavior of how we use and manage the land. And we're hoping again to engage a wide discussion on how best to do that. And so right now it's premature for me to talk any about those kind of things, but I can say we're looking for deep involvement, deep engagement, and build partnership.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I still would like to maybe a little follow up, and I know it's pretty premature because this is really kind of a big picture thing that the Biden administration has put out at this point about what that details look like. But maybe from your perspective, when you say protecting our lands, what does that mean? What do you see that looking like?
Well, when I said our, this is a collective our, the US of A, not the BLM, not the department, but a collective. But really, I see us coming together to figure out how can we manage the lands in a way, not only for present, but for future generation. How can we continue to use the lands in a way that allow communities to thrive, that allow American people to have good jobs, that allow us to recreate? And so it's a very broad scope. And I think depends on where you are in the country, there's different emphasis or there's different approach to managing land. And so I don't think a one size fit all will do, but I think engaging communities will be important. And so it's trying to find that shared vision, because I think we all agree. We want this land to be there for the future generation, but we also want it to be able to support our communities and local livelihood.
Thank you.
So maybe
Merritt,
one more follow up. Sorry, can I go one more follow up?
Of course.
So I really appreciate what you say about the accessibility for the public for recreation. And I also think that most of the Club 20 counties are proponents of the multi-use aspect of public lands, which includes logging and grazing, which, as we know, in light of our last year's fire season, that logging and grazing are not only fire management tools and helping to reduce those fuel loads, but also the aspect of how these fires, when they're out of control on these non-managed areas, put just tons and billions of tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And I think that needs to be part of this climate change strategy that the BLM hopefully could be partners with. So I just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward with some of these policies and procedures that we adopt if we get that point on the 30 by 30 kind of a thing.
Absolutely, fully agree that the fire management aspect is a big part of that, and we cannot ignore. As a matter of fact, we need to put more emphasis. So thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have additional questions for Mr. Ned? If you do, please go ahead and use the raise your hand feature or type into the chat box, and I would be happy to call on you. Well, I'm seeing none. Mr. Ned, thank you so much for joining us. I wish we could be in person, but we certainly appreciate you making some time to join us by Zoom this afternoon.
Yeah, love being here and connecting, and I too can't wait to get back to the in-person. There's something about being in person in the same room and having good conversation. So thank you for having me again. Best wishes to all of your members as you continue to pursue these important issues, and please don't hesitate to call upon the BLM if there's anything we can do or in any way we can help. Thank you for having me.
We just want you to stay in Grand Junction, but that's another conversation.
Oh, my. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
All right.
Before we introduce our next speaker, I do just want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors for our virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in. Our title sponsor for this event is Chevron. Our general sponsors are Mark and Kathy Fackler. Thank you so much for your support of this virtual event. And our digital briefing book was sponsored by Executive Security International and Rocky Mountain Health Plans. These events wouldn't be possible without the generous support of these sponsors. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm excited to introduce to you our final speaker of the day. Our final speaker is also somebody who has met with Club 20 every time we've been out in Washington, D.C., and he has ties to Colorado, which we also love and appreciate. As Deputy Director of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, Steve Gerton provides strategic program direction and develops policy and guidance to support and promote program development and fulfill the service mission. He led the Mountain Prairie region, which is in Denver, as Regional Director for 5 years and successfully managed some of the most challenging landscape level conservation issues. Steve, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Looks like I got on to Zoom successfully. It's great to see everybody, albeit it's in a virtual environment, and we're all looking forward to a safe return so we can have these future meetings in person, because we value that interaction we can get being in the room together. But really, really appreciate the opportunity and thought I could share some updates for everybody on the transition that's been underway the last couple of months as we've moved into the first few months of the Biden administration. And just on the personnel front for everybody, we've got, as is always the case when the administration comes in and out, new political leadership teams starting to come in. And starting at our level, Martha Williams is serving as our principal deputy director, exercising the authority of the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so Martha was one of our state director partners out in Montana. She was director of Montana Fish and Wildlife and Parks, so has a lot of a background at the state level, working on large landscapes and working with a lot of similar issues you guys deal with there, West Slope, Colorado. Scuttlebutt abounds of who may eventually be nominated to be the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a Senate confirmed position, which means there'll be a formal nomination coming out of the White House. You may have better rumor control on that than I do, but for the time being, Martha is in the chair and we're delighted to have her, and she's been a great voice for our mission and very savvy. Our Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks, Shannon Estunaz, has completed her Senate confirmation hearing process, and they're now voting on her qualifications in 2 committees of jurisdiction. Because she oversees both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service at the federal level, she's got to go through 2 different committees there to get her credentials verified. And the media is reporting that she's doing very well in those hearings, and we're anticipating that she would be confirmed into her position sometime this summer. She comes to us from Florida. She worked for many years on Everglades restoration projects, and so has a wealth of experience on landscape level conservation, balancing that with a lot of infrastructure and other needs down there in the Everglades. And then certainly Secretary Haaland has been with us for a couple of months now. Congresswoman has a lot of strength she's bringing to the position there. I haven't met her personally because everything's still in a virtual environment, so to speak, but we're hearing a lot from her and her priorities. And what I thought I could do today is share with the group some of the emerging priorities for the new administration. And so in general terms, President Biden has centered on 4 pillars, so to speak, or 4 cornerstones for priorities for all of the federal government. And of course, we're just one small agency in the larger matrix there, but we nest into many of those as well. And we're very interrelated and helping to drive a lot of these results. The first pillar is a COVID-19 pandemic, trying to get the country through that. Of course, there's the big vaccination drive underway, a lot of that handled under CDC. But for us, it impacts us with federal employees in the offices, the field stations, and we have to align with all that CDC, and probably just as important, the visiting public, their ability to get out and recreate on the public lands. The National Wildlife Refuge System, for example, is under our program management responsibilities. We align with the CDC policy. So right now, to visit a wildlife refuge out in the public, they've lifted the mask mandate. I think there's a little bit of experience. You'll differ that when you go into some of the federal buildings, depending on what local jurisdictions have in place as well. And then as we continue to work through COVID, for us as wildlife managers, we're also trying to figure out, are there other zoonotic diseases out there that might come and impact the economy and the country as well? And certainly we've seen with avian flu and other zoonotic diseases, there's always a concern out there. So we're working with the USGS and the larger federal scientific community and the state fish and game agencies to do what we can to project out, are there any other potential issues that may come in for the country as a whole? The second pillar for the Biden administration, they're calling racial equity, a renewed commitment to environmental justice and impacts to disadvantaged and underserved communities. Our nexus is the Fish and Wildlife Service. We have a lot of our refuges in an urban setting, and certainly we do a lot of work with our tribal communities, particularly consultations and access to eagle feathers. And so we're going to do everything we can in that realm to partner with our folks out there in the field stations and local communities. On the economic front, theme for the current administration, they're calling Build Back Better or larger recovery. You're seeing at the larger national level, a lot of the bigger programs underway. For us, this is going to come into the nuts and bolts for the federal agencies, our buildings, our infrastructure, and we're hoping that we can get some infrastructure investment to put into our facilities, rebuilding some of the hatcheries, some of the crumbling infrastructure there is 50, 100 years old, for example, and we can build it back better with better technologies, more efficient water management systems, things like that. A lot of the refuges are pretty old as well. We can certainly benefit from additional funding to rebuild visitor centers, address some of the challenges out there. And then Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, we have to participate in the larger Build Back Better priority in that we do a lot of work with other regulatory agencies on the permitting process, siting and things like that. And so we're doing the best we can to be nimble and to put a lot of information online, work with a project and components and others to provide the information necessary. And then built into this for us as well is access to the federal estate. And for us, that's the National Wildlife Refuge System. The last couple of years, we've done a very deep dive year after year to look at additional hunting and angling opportunities on the National Wildlife Refuge System. In the Trump administration, we opened about 4.5 million acres of additional hunting and fishing opportunities on the refuge system. And in the first year of the Biden administration, we're going to be opening another 2 million acres for hunters and fishermen access onto the National Wildlife Refuge System. And we think that's helping the larger economy build back better by providing these hunting and fishing opportunities for folks to get outside and recreate and take advantage of this just great opportunities we have, whether you're a saltwater or freshwater fisher or big game hunting, upland, whatever it is, we can provide some of those opportunities. And then we're also doing a lot of work, as all the federal agencies are, in aspirational things for us focused on our wildlife conservation and programs like that. And in Western states, we've done a lot of work with state fish and game agencies, for example, on wildlife corridors, particularly for big game species. That's been a big priority for the state fish and game agencies. A lot of that work is centered on the big game species themselves, elk, mule deer, pronghorn, etc. But other species can benefit from that as well. And this is very science-driven, but it's been a great opportunity to knit together opportunities to increase game herds, opportunities for us to support more sportsmen's access, and opportunities for us to work more closely with our counterparts in the state fish and game agencies in and of themselves. We then, under conservation, I'm sure you're hearing a lot of this initiative called 30 by 30, which is more of an aspirational thing. The administration did a lot of listening sessions, tried to reach out to tribes and states and landowners and others. Earlier, a couple weeks ago, published an America the Beautiful report. It's about a 25 page aspirational document. It's something, if members of your leadership team don't have access to, let me know and I can send you the URL or a hot link to it so people can read it. I think there was a lot of consternation at first when the Biden administration started announcing this. What did it mean? And what it means to us as one of the agencies that would participate. First thing we want to do is work with the USGS and just kind of figure out what is out there. So they're opening up a data warehouse or library just to figure out what is out there. And then a lot of the verbiage in there talks about working with hunters and anglers and private landowners and other stakeholders to help the administration figure out what that is. So I think it's safe to say at this point, it's really kind of a vision document, and it's all about getting feedback from leadership groups around the country as to what they imagine conservation would look like going forward as well. So be glad to provide any additional information, literature, some of the published information that's out there for folks, so you can take a look at it yourselves. And if you have ideas and suggestions, we'd love to hear them because you guys are living where this is happening, and I think would provide invaluable insights for us as well. And then here in the Fish and Wildlife Service itself, there's a couple key deadlines coming up that you guys should keep an eye out on. Friday, the 28th, the administration is going to release its long-awaited budget request for fiscal year 23 appropriations. This is usually the strongest signal people can see of the direction that any administration is going. And hopefully you'll see in there the administration's been paying a lot of attention to the priorities that are important up in Colorado, particularly sportsmen's access and support for energy development and infrastructure maintenance projects and things like that. And we'll be able to share more updates on that once this drops after Friday afternoon itself, so you can see what's going on. And then, as is happening with anytime there's a turn in administration, everyone coming in kind of takes a look at the regulatory determinations the previous administration had put out. Big one, probably of interest to your leadership group, is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The Trump administration had its definition of what that meant and allowed incidental take in their regulations. New administration has come in and doesn't agree with that view, and so has published regulations to take down the Trump interpretation of that, and is going to work with particularly the wind energy, other energy providers, the states and tribes, to help develop a framework to put in place a new set of regulations. That work just getting started, so the door is wide open for feedback, suggestions, and of course that will go through a very robust public engagement process and lots of opportunities to hear from folks with your views on the direction you think that type of initiative should go as well. We believe we've got a great partnership out there with everyone in the state of Colorado. We've got great folks in our Denver office and certainly out there on the West Slope and many of our field stations. I loved when I was out there with my family. We got to spend a lot of time in the beautiful state and always look forward to going back. But, you know, I'm a career employee. We're all public servants here. We're here to serve the public. And so we work with whatever administration comes in to help lead us in each cycle. We're all about focusing on the mission that we're entrusted with. And for us, it's wildlife and fisheries conservation. We're all about providing public access. We're all about working with our elected officials in Congress, our partners and advocacy groups and landowners and others to hear your views. So, you know, anytime folks have ideas, suggestions, things we're not paying attention to, let us know. We want to try to work with you to get to the bottom of what's going on, and above all, hear what's on your mind. And so we wanted to leave last 15, 20 minutes or so for any questions or feedback. But again, I greatly appreciate your interest in talking to our agency, and appreciate the opportunity to meet you guys again, and sincerely looking forward to when we can have these opportunities in person. So thanks. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you so much for your remarks. We too are looking forward to that opportunity. We're a little more opened up here in Colorado than you are out in DC. So, you know, hopefully some of those early meetings can happen here on our grounds. Chris Treese wrote in the chat, he said, Steve, thank you for mentioning the 30 by 30 program and acknowledging the early concerns. Can you please provide some clarity regarding what the program means or intends by the words protecting or conserving 30% of the nation's lands and water?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the heart of the issue and the heart of the concerns that are coming back in from constituent groups and landowners and others. I think some of the, you know, and this had its origins during the campaigns last year, where each campaign was kind of publishing their vision for America, and this kind of moved into the real world now of program implementation. I think the administration is viewing this as a decade-long opportunity to support locally led and voluntary conservation and restoration efforts across public, private, and tribal lands, all about creating jobs, strengthening the economy, tackling climate change, and opening up sportsmen's access and access to the outdoors. I've carefully read the language in that 30 by 30 report myself. It seems to open up a lot of opportunity to get that feedback in. I think the administration, speaking for myself, the term 30 by 30 raised a lot of concerns with people because it was a hard number. And now the report is calling on instead, let's catalog what's really going on out there, how much land is actually conserved or protected. I think at first the term conserve or protected was viewed very strictly. And I think the administration's position now in the way that 30 by 30 report is phrasing it, let's talk about that. And, you know, certainly if we have a national wildlife refuge system, arguably that's conserved in perpetuity. If a private landowner has chosen to enter a voluntary conservation agreement with USDA, Forest Service, or other agencies at the federal level, arguably there's a conservation layer over that. It's not as strict an interpretation as a national park unit, for example, but arguably that would count. A big military base with a lot of buffers around it, that's probably in a conservation status. So that's a great question. And I don't think the honest answer is it's been pinned down what that's going to mean going forward. And I believe the opportunity is here right now to help the Biden team define what that means. And glad to talk more on this call or send me suggestions as well. And I can feed it into the folks over there working on it.
And I think that's part of some of the concerns Westerners have is, where are you going to conserve lands in Virginia? It's likely going to happen on the western half of the United States, that increased land conservation. And certainly, we already struggle with managing some of the public lands that we already have, and adding to that system is concerning, because we know we have to fight for those resources, those financial resources daily, just to manage the lands we have. So it's something we definitely have been keeping an eye on, and I'd be glad to put together some thoughts and comments to share with you on that particular issue.
No, that would be very appreciated, and I'll give it right to our political leadership team. And I would note, and I can't cite the actual page, but the way the 30 by 30 report, there's a pledge in there that, we're not viewing this as only Western states. We're going to focus a lot on the Eastern states, and, areas like the Adirondacks up in upstate New York, or working landscapes in Maine, where there's a lot of private timberland in the Southeast. And we've actually got a lot of really proactive conservation going on with some of the big timber and small producers in the Southeast who are seeing the value of some of these conservation partnerships, and other parts of the country as well. But I think it's safe to say the new political leadership team are paying a lot of attention to this feedback from folks living in the West about what does this mean. And so we would welcome your feedback, and please send me some written stuff as well. I'll get it up the line as soon as I get it.
Excellent, thank you. Merritt Linky, our board chair from Grand County, has his hand raised. Merritt, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, and thank you. And I echo some of the comments and the question that Chris Streese had regarding 30 by 30, but my question is a little different regarding your take on the listing or delisting of the wolf. As you know, the Western states are kind of a mixed bag on that. Idaho obviously is having big problems with it. They have passed a policy where they're going to try to reduce by 90%, but Colorado is now on the ballot issue passed last fall to release wolves into Western Colorado. So I just would like your take on what it kind of looks like at the federal level regarding the listing or delisting.
No, thanks, Barry. And that's a great question. Sure. And we're a bunch of egghead scientists. So from our perspective, we have long advocated that the wolf is biologically recovered in the lower 48. And we have moved to delist wolves in Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, Eastern Oregon, and Washington. That's our northern DPS population. And then we've moved to delist them in the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes. We believe we've achieved all of the mandates of recovery, and want to stick with that. And we then moved last fall to delist wolves in the rest of the lower 48, except the Mexican gray wolf down in southern Arizona, New Mexico, different critter down there. And that rule is now in effect. And this is a vestige of the way the Endangered Species Act came together. Wolves were listed in downtown Denver and downtown Newark, New Jersey. They hadn't been seen there in centuries, so to speak. So we moved to move those off the list. Right now, understand Colorado has a vision in its elected officials to reintroduce the wolf into the state. That's now, because the wolf is delisted, a state issue. We're just going to be technical advisors on that front. And we're facing a lot of potential litigation now in the northern Rocky Mountains. The way things are trending up there in those two state houses in Idaho and Montana, new legislation coming in, which would put in place a lot of management activity, which would reduce wolves quickly to the kind of floors that were established there, 150, 15 breeding pair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of these national environmental groups are now coming in. In the media, we've already got a notice of intent to sue to bring those back there. And so what we're going to do as an agency is stick with science. We believe wolves are recovered with those protocols in place in the northern Rocky Mountains. We will stand by that and keep it moving forward. And then if individual states want to move forward, that's going to be handled at their level there. And so I know there's been debates off and on in Colorado about a reintroduction. There was one like 15, 20 years ago, put them into Rocky Mountain National Park. They would have been out of the park the next morning. There's no food up in that high country. And I understand, the concern that's going to have with bringing the wolf back to the state. Right now, though, the ball is in the court for the state to make that determination going forward. And we'll be working on this larger, holding on to the delisting up in the northern Rocky Mountains at this point in time. So that's kind of my honest assessment of where things stand. It's politically and legally fraught, emotionally fraught issue. And
Thank you. That's good to hear. Just a follow-up question might be is that the Mexican gray wolf, as you mentioned, I think is still on the list, correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So is there potential conflicts with the release of the gray wolf with the Mexican wolf in terms of how one's listed, one's not? And we know that there's existing sightings in Colorado, and now we're going to bring in this different species or subspecies of wolf. How does that all fit? How do we, I guess that's a dream job for lawyers. I'm not sure.
So that's what happens then is you'll have a similarity of appearance issue. A Mexican gray wolf somehow winds up in Colorado or Utah. It could be mistaken for a recently reintroduced a gray wolf. And so that's something the state will have to figure out when they develop their reintroduction plan, if that's the direction the state moves forward with. We're not seeing from the historical record a lot of movement from those animals coming up into Colorado or Utah. There's a lot of ground for them to cover at this point. Most of the animals are known to the state or to us, and they try to keep an eye on them so they stay within the experimental areas they are down there. They get into a lot of trouble very quickly in those two states once they leave that very exclusive area. There's a lot of shooting and trapping of them if they move off, and the state or us quickly try to get them back in the allowable area. So there's a lot of heavy monitoring of those wolves in southern New Mexico and Arizona. But your point is a very valid one, and something certainly wildlife managers need to be very cautious as they move forward with any planning up there.
Thank you. Appreciate the insight on that. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you again for your question.
Do we have additional questions for Mr. Girton before? Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, it rhymes with curtain.
I Googled it, and I actually read about the genealogy of your last name.
Oh, French Canadian.
I did, yeah. And depending on where you're at, it's pronounced differently. So I took the chance that it was pronounced by the more traditional American pronunciation than the French pronunciation, but.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm not seeing any more hands raised or questions in the chat box. So, sir, also, Rosalind Sellers is amazing and lovely to work with, just so you know.
Thank you. I'll tell her that. And I appreciate, I know it gets cumbersome with distance scheduling and getting everybody's schedule aligned, but thank you for calling out Rosalind. She's an exceptional civil servant, and we're always proud of her interactions with everybody we get to work with. She's a great ambassador for the federal family of agencies. So
Yes,
thanks.
she is. I always look forward to communicating with her. So, sir, thank you again for joining us today. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your time.
Sure, thank you. And stay safe out there, and looking forward to seeing everybody probably sooner than we imagine. It's moving pretty quick, the
Yes,
reopening.
it is. Yes,
Wonderful.
it is.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I do want to take a moment just to thank our sponsors one last time. As you guys all know, we wouldn't be able to do these events without the support of our sponsorships, and they literally do keep the lights on here at Club 20 along with your continued membership support. Our title sponsor is Chevron. Our general sponsors were Mark and Kathy Feckler, and your digital briefing book was brought to you by Executive Security International and Rocky Mountain Health Plans. We hope you enjoyed this virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in, and please save the dates for our summer policy meetings, and note that the first week of policy meetings has been changed to Montrose, to being located in Montrose, not in Ouray. So we will be in Montrose for that first week, and then our second week will be up in Craig. So please stay tuned for agendas and registration options for that event. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
The plane should be going the other way.
Sorry, Merritt, there
muted.
weren't very many options.
I guess we can just keep going around the world and end up back here where,
Yeah.
where we're supposed to be.
Unless you're a flat earther.
Well,
Sure.
there's that.
Charlie, thank you so much for your kind note in that chat. I was just getting a chance to read it.
You're welcome. I didn't mean to distract you. Sorry, I hit send at the wrong time.
I have gotten surprisingly talented at doing 27 things at one time.
Oh, I saw that.
I'm Googling, I'm responding to emails, that's just what I've learned to do. So
Well, thanks again, Christian. This was great.
thank you, and have a good Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Christian. I'm getting off.
Thanks, guys. Me too. Thanks, Ray, for your comment. I agree with you.
Have a great weekend, all.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
See you, Ray.
Yep. You too, sir.